Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Ironwood, but everyone calls me Tom. I've been watching these West Virginia mountains for 19 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the forest could throw at me. Turns out, I was wrong. The fire tower on Beartown Mountain is my world. 80 feet up, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and sky, it's the perfect place for a man who needs space to breathe. After Vietnam, crowds made my skin crawl. Too many people meant too many places for danger to hide. Up here, I can see everything coming from miles away. My wife, Sarah, understands. She visits once a month, brings supplies, and stays a few days. We don't talk much about the war, but she knows why I need this job. Some nights, when the flashbacks come, she'll sit with me on the platform, and we'll watch the stars until my hands stop shaking. The Forest Service respects me because I know my business. In 1987, I spotted smoke from a lightning strike before the satellites even picked it up. My radio call saved thousands of acres and probably a few lives. The brass likes rangers who get results. September in the Monongahela is beautiful. The leaves just starting to turn, morning mist rising from the valleys, and that crisp smell of autumn in the air. From my tower, I can see for 30 miles on a clear day. Every aircraft, every weather pattern, every column of smoke, I log it all. People around here love their ghost stories. Mothman sightings, strange lights, voices in the woods. Most of it's nonsense. Those red eyes folks claim to see? Aircraft warning lights reflecting off low clouds. The military flies training missions out of Parkersburg, and city folks don't know a helicopter from a UFO. But this September felt different. The animals were acting strange. Deer wouldn't come to the clearings, birds changed their migration routes, and at night the forest went dead quiet. Real quiet, like so. Me-thing big was hunting and everything else knew to hide. My equipment started picking up weird signals too. Static on frequencies that should be clear. Electromagnetic interference that made my radio crackle with voices that weren't quite human. I checked everything twice. Antennas, connections, power supply. All perfect. Then the reports started coming in. 3 hikers in the past 2 weeks claimed they saw something massive flying over the canopy after dark. Not a plane, they said. Something with wings that moved like a bird but was way too big. Something with glowing red eyes that watched them from the treetops. I've been in these mountains long enough to know the difference between scared campers and real trouble. These folks weren't making it up. The fear in their voices was genuine, the kind you can't fake. They'd seen something that shouldn't exist. That's when I decided to start keeping a closer watch after sunset. The first real sign of trouble came on a Tuesday night. I was updating my weather log when my radio picked up a distress call from down in Cranberry Valley. A hiker named Mark Coleman was screaming about something in the trees, something huge circling his campsite. "It's got wings," he kept shouting. Jesus Christ, look at the size of those wings. Then static. Then nothing. I tried raising the valley patrol, but my radio was acting up again. Strange clicking sounds, like Morse code but faster than any human could send. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the valley, but the darkness was too thick to see anything useful. Next morning I hiked down to check Coleman's last known position. What I found made my blood run cold. His campsite looked like a tornado hit it. Tent shredded to ribbons, sleeping bag torn apart, camping gear scattered across 100 yards of forest floor. But no body, no blood trail, nothing to show where Mark Coleman went. Weird part was the impressions in the muddy ground near his tent. Wing prints, not bird tracks. Actual impressions from something that landed hard and took off again. I measured them, carefully. 20 feet from tip to tip, maybe more. I've seen every bird that flies over these mountains. Eagles, hawks, turkey vultures, even the occasional crane. Nothing comes close to that size. Nothing natural, anyway. I took photos and radioed headquarters, but they seemed more interested in covering their asses than investigating. Probably a bear attack, the chief said. Bears can scatter gear pretty good when they're looking for food. Bears don't have wings. That night I stayed alert. Coffee every hour, binoculars never far from my hands. Around 2 a.m. the forest went completely silent. No owls, no insects, no wind through the leaves, just dead, heavy quiet that made my ears ring. Then I heard it, a sound like leather snapping in the wind, but huge. Something was flying out there, something big enough to make the air whistle when it moved. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the sky. At first nothing, then I saw it, a dark shape against the stars, circling maybe a mile away. It moved wrong, too smooth for a machine, too big for any animal I knew. And when it turned, I caught a glimpse of 2 red lights where its eyes should be. The thing circled for 10 minutes, getting closer each time. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the same adrenaline rush I used to get before a firefight in the jungle. Something was hunting out there, and it was looking for prey. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the creature vanished into the night. The forest sounds slowly returned, crickets first, then an owl hooting in the distance. But I didn't sleep until dawn. 3 days later they found Coleman, or what was left of him. A logging crew discovered his body wedged in the fork of a white oak, 60 feet off the ground. The coroner said he died from trauma and exposure, but couldn't explain how he'd gotten up there. The tree had no low branches, no way to claw. Climb it without equipment. Strangest part was his hair. Mark Coleman was 32 years old with thick brown hair in all his photos. When they brought him down from that tree, his hair was completely white. Not gray, not silver. Bone white. Like he'd seen something so terrible it drained the color right out of him. The official report called it an unusual accident. Case closed. But I knew better. Something had grabbed Mark Coleman from his campsite, carried him 60 feet up, and left him there to die. Something that flew on 20-foot wings and watched the world through glowing red eyes. And now it knew these mountains had a watcher in the pines. After Coleman's death, I started mapping the attacks. 3 more hikers went missing over the next week, all in different areas, but following a strange pattern. The creature seemed to hunt along power lines and ridge tops, places where ley lines intersected according to the old maps. I drove into town and visited Mrs. Hodges at the Historical Society. She was 86 and sharp as a razor, with a memory that went back 3 generations. "Oh, honey," she said when I described the sightings, "that sounds like the Thunderbird. My grandmother used to tell stories about it when I was little." She pulled out a leather-bound journal filled with newspaper clippings and handwritten notes. According to her records, similar attacks happened every 15 years or so, going back to the 1800s. Always the same pattern. Hikers found in impossible places, hair turned white, no explanation for how they got there. The Seneca called it, "He who brings death from sky," and she said. They had ceremonies to keep it away, but white folks don't listen to old wisdom. That night I saw it clearly for the first time. I was checking my weather instruments around midnight when movement caught my eye. Something huge was perched on the radio tower, and not 50 yards from my position. In the moonlight I could make out its basic shape, like a man but with massive wings folded against its back. It sat perfectly still for maybe 5 minutes, staring directly at my tower, at my windows, at me. Its eyes glowed like hot coals, and I swear I could feel them boring into my skull. My vision started to blur, and images flashed through my mind. Pictures of bridges collapsing, cars burning, people screaming. Then I saw myself falling from the tower, my body broken on the rocks below. I blinked hard and grabbed my rifle, but when I looked again, the creature was gone. Only the bent antenna on top of the radio tower proved it had been there at all. The next day, the Kanawha River Bridge collapsed during rush hour. 37 people died. The images in my vision had been exact. Every detail, every piece of twisted metal, every scream. How could I have seen something that hadn't happened yet? Bill Rawlings, my partner on the ground crew, came up to check on me that weekend. Bill was good people. A family man with 3 kids and a laugh that could be heard a mile away. We'd worked together for 8 years, and he was probably the closest thing I had to a friend. "You look like hell, Tom," he said, setting down a case of beer. "Sarah's worried about you. Says you're having nightmares again." I told him everything, the attacks, the creature, the visions. Bill listened without laughing, which I appreciated. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "So, what do you want to do about it?" "I want to kill it," I said. "Then let's figure out how." We spent the weekend researching, planning, gathering supplies. Bill brought military-grade flares, explosive charges he'd salvaged from an old mining operation, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. If the thing came back, we'd be ready. Sunday night, Bill decided to stay over and help keep watch. We took shifts, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. Nothing happened until just before dawn. I was dozing when Bill shook me awake. "Tom," he whispered, "look at this." The creature. Ree was back, perched on a dead pine about 200 yards away. In the pre-dawn light, I could see it more clearly. 7 feet tall at least, with a human-like torso but arms that stretched into leathery wings. Its face was almost human too, except for those burning red eyes and a mouth full of teeth like broken glass. "Jesus," Bill breathed. "That thing's real." The creature tilted its head, studying us. Then it spread its wings, 20 feet easy, maybe more, and launched itself into the air. Instead of flying away, it circled the tower, getting closer with each pass. "It's testing us," I said, "seeing what we'll do." Bill had his rifle ready, but the thing stayed just out of range. After 10 minutes of circling, it landed on the tower platform directly below us. The whole structure shook under its weight. We could hear it moving around down there, testing the supports, clawing at the metal stairs. It was learning the tower's weak points, figuring out how to bring us down. Then it started making sounds. Not animal sounds, human sounds. Voices I recognized. "Tom, help me!" It was using Mark Coleman's voice, perfect in every detail. "The wings! Look at the size of those wings!" Bill's voice now, exactly as he'd spoken just minutes before. It was mimicking us, learning our words, our fears, building a collection of human sounds to use as weapons. When the sun came up, the creature flew away. But I knew it would be back. That afternoon, Bill hiked down to get more supplies from his truck. He never made it back. I found his body the next morning, arranged in a perfect circle of pine branches like some kind of ritual offering. His hair was white as snow, and his face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Whatever he'd seen in his final moments had been beyond human comprehension. The creature had left him where I'd be sure to find him. A message, a challenge. Oh, it was coming for me next. After Bill's death, I knew the truth. This wasn't just some monster hunting random victims. It was drawn to places where disasters were going to happen, feeding on the fear and tragedy before they occurred. The bridge collapse, the missing hikers, Bill's death. It had all been leading up to something bigger. My radio equipment started picking up emergency broadcasts about a massive storm system moving in from the west. Hurricane-force winds, tornadoes, floods. The meteorologists were calling it a once-in-a-century weather event that would devastate the entire region. The creature knew it was coming. That's why it was here. That's why it had been circling the tower, studying me. I wasn't its meal. I was standing in the way of its feast. Tuesday night, the attacks began in earnest. The thing started by destroying my radio antenna, cutting off all communication with the outside world. Then it began systematically weakening the tower's support cables, using its claws to fray the steel until only a few strands held each section. I could hear it moving around the structure, testing joints, pulling at bolts. Every few minutes, the tower would shudder and groan. It was trying to bring me down slowly, piece by piece. Around midnight, it perched on the platform railing just outside my window. This close, I could smell it, like ozone and rotting meat, with an electric tang that made my teeth ache. Its red eyes filled the entire window, staring at me with an intelligence that was completely inhuman. When it spoke, it used Bill's voice again. "You can't stop what's coming, Tom. The storm will kill hundreds. All those people in the valleys. in their trailers and farmhouses. They don't know what's heading their way. I grabbed my rifle and fired through the window. The glass exploded, but the creature was already gone. I could hear it laughing somewhere in the darkness, a sound like wind through a cemetery. "Your friend tried to run," it said, using Mark Coleman's voice now. I showed him what fear really looks like. "Would you like to see?" Images flooded my mind. Bill's final moments, the terror in his eyes as the creature lifted him into the air, the sound of his sanity snapping like a dry branch. I could feel his fear, taste his despair. "Stop it," I screamed. "You could join them," the creature whispered. "I could make it quick, better than what's coming with the storm." That's when I understood. The creature wasn't just predicting the storm. It was here because the storm would create a massive tragedy. Hundreds of people in the valleys below had no idea what was coming their way. The weather service warnings hadn't reached them yet. But I had emergency radio equipment, backup systems that could reach the evacuation centers, warn the surrounding communities. If I could get to my equipment, I could save lives. The creature realized what I was thinking. It let out a shriek that shattered every piece of glass in the tower and launched itself at the platform. I dove for my emergency radio as the entire structure swayed under the creature's impact. Steel cables snapped with sounds like gunshots, and the tower listed dangerously to one side. "Mayday, mayday," I shouted into the radio. "This is Beartown Tower. Massive storm incoming. Evacuate all low-lying areas immediately." The creature's claws raked across the roof, tearing through metal like paper. More cables snapped, and the tower tilted further. I was running out of time. "Category 5 winds, multiple tornadoes, flash flooding," I continued broadcasting. "Get to high ground now. This is not a drill." The creature landed on the platform outside, its weight finally breaking the damaged supports. The tower groaned, metal screaming against metal, and began to collapse. As we fell, I grabbed the explosive charges Bill had brought and armed them with shaking hands. If I was going down, I was taking this thing with me. The creature saw what I was doing and tried to fly away, but I grabbed its leg as it took off. We crashed together into the pine trees 60 feet down, branches breaking our fall. I triggered the charges. The explosion lit up the forest like daylight. The creature's scream shattered windows in towns 10 miles away. When the smoke cleared, I was alone among the wreckage, bleeding but alive. The creature was gone, but somehow I knew it wasn't dead. Wounded, maybe, driven away, but not destroyed. Above us, the storm clouds were gathering. The emergency broadcasts saved over 300 lives that night. People in 12 counties heard my warnings and evacuated to higher ground before the storm hit. The tornado that carved through Cranberry Valley would have killed dozens if they'd stayed in their homes. They found me in the wreckage the next morning, half dead from blood loss and exposure. The official report said I'd stayed at my post during a tower collapse caused by high winds, continuing to broadcast warnings until the structure fell. Heroes, they called me, the ranger who risked everything to save others. They didn't mention the creature. There was no evidence left, just a burned clearing and my wild story about a winged monster that fed on tragedy. The psychiatric evaluation said I was suffering from PTSD and survivor's guilt, that I'd created the creature as a way to cope with the trauma of losing Bill. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was crazy. But then why did my hair start turning white? Why do I sometimes wake up knowing exactly when and where disasters will strike? Why do I catch myself staring at the sky with eyes that reflect red light in the darkness? Sarah noticed the changes first. The way I'd stop talking mid-sentence and stare at nothing, seeing things that hadn't happened yet. The way I'd wake up screaming about plane crashes and earthquakes that wouldn't happen for weeks. We moved to Arizona after I retired. Desert country, where you can see the horizon in every direction and nothing can sneak up on you. Sarah thinks the dry air and open spaces will help me heal. She's wrong. Last week I had another vision, a school bus sliding off an icy mountain road, 37 children trapped inside. It'll happen next winter, somewhere in Colorado. I've already written letters to the state transportation department warning them about the danger, but they think I'm just another crazy old veteran. The creature is still out there. I can feel it sometimes, circling in the darkness beyond the stars, waiting for the next disaster, the next feast of human fear and suffering. And sometimes when the sunset turns the desert sky blood red and the shadows grow long across the sand, I wonder if it's waiting for me too. My name is Thomas Ironwood, and I've been watching the skies for 20 years now. I thought I was keeping people safe from fires and storms. Turns out I was watching for something much worse, something that's been watching me back. Final word count, 4,247 words. My name is Patricia Ashworth, but everyone calls me Patty. I've been a park ranger for 4 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the woods could throw at me. Lost hikers, injured campers, the occasional bear encounter. I handled it all. At 26, I was the youngest female ranger in Virginia, working the George Washington National Forest. Most of my male colleagues thought I was too soft for the job, especially when it came to my specialty, finding lost children. I'd rescued 23 kids over the years. Every single one made it home safe. I kept a small stuffed bear in my pack, just for them, something to hold on to while we walked back to their worried parents. Maybe I cared so much because I never had parents of my own. Foster care teaches you what it feels like to be lost. The Ramsey's Draft Wilderness area was my assigned territory, 15,000 acres of old-growth forest where some trees had been standing since before Columbus. It was restricted access, which meant fewer visitors, but also meant when someone got lost, they were really lost. The ancient trees grew so thick that in some places noon looked like twilight. That morning in May 1968, I was checking my equipment when the radio crackled. Scout Troop 847 had called in a strange report. Their leader, Jim Morrison, sounded shaken. "Ranger Ashworth, we need to talk. Something followed us last night. Something that wasn't right." I found their campsite an hour later. Jim was a 20-year veteran of camping trips, the kind of man who could start a fire in a rainstorm. But his hands were shaking as he poured coffee. "It started around midnight," he said. "We heard laughing, children's voices, but not normal. Wild, like they were playing some kind of game in the dark." His assistant leader, Pete, nodded quickly. "We did a head count. All 12 boys were in their tents, accounted for, but the laughing kept going, getting closer. Then we saw them," Jim continued. "Shapes moving between the trees, small, like kids, but they moved wrong. On their hands and knees mostly, but fast. Faster than any person should move." I'd heard stories like this before. Parents whose teenagers ran away often convinced themselves their kids had been taken by something supernatural. It was easier than admitting their child chose to leave. "How many did you see?" I asked, taking notes. "Maybe 5 or 6, hard to tell in the dark. But when Tommy Martin shined his flashlight at them, they scattered up into the trees, up the tree trunks like squirrels." I looked at 12-year-old Tommy, who was sitting by the fire looking pale. "What did you see exactly?" "Kids," he whispered. "But their hair was all matted and long. And their fingernails, they looked like claws. One of them looked right at me and smiled. Its teeth were all brown and sharp." The other boys nodded in agreement. All of them had the same story. "We're breaking camp," Jim said. "This place doesn't feel right." I helped them pack up, but I stayed behind to investigate. Probably just some local kids playing pranks, though how they'd gotten into restricted wilderness was a mystery. As a ranger, it was my job to find them and get them back to safety before they hurt themselves. The woods felt different after the scouts left, quieter. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. I set up my own small camp near where the troop had been and waited for nightfall. Around 10 p.m. I heard it. Laughter. Soft at first, then growing louder. It was definitely children. I'd know that sound anywhere. But there was something wrong with it. It sounded too wild, too free, like children who had never been told no or be quiet in their entire lives. I grabbed my flashlight and radio. "Base, this is Ranger Ashworth. I'm investigating reports of children in the Ramsey's Draft area. We'll report back in 1 hour." The laughter stopped the moment I spoke. The forest went completely silent. I waited, listening to my own heartbeat. Then, very softly, I heard rustling in the bushes about 50 yards away. I turned my light toward the sound, but saw only shadows and leaves. "Hello?" I called out. "I'm a park ranger. If you kids are out there, you need to come with me. It's not safe in the woods at night." More rustling, this time from 3 different directions. They were moving around me in a circle. "I'm here to help," I said, keeping my voice calm and gentle. "Are you lost? Are you hungry?" A small voice answered from the darkness. "We're not lost." The voice sounded young, maybe 8 or 9 years old. But there was something ancient about it, like an old person trying to sound like a child. "What's your name?" I asked, turning toward the voice. "We don't have names anymore," came the reply. "Names are for the ones who go home." A chill ran down my spine. "Everyone has a name. What did your parents call you?" Silence. Then from a completely different direction, "Parents are for the ones who go home." I spun around, but my light caught only empty forest. These kids were moving without making sound, positioning themselves around me like hunters surrounding prey. "Look," I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "I know you're scared, but I promise I can help you get back to your families." The laughter started again, but this time it was all around me. At least 6 different voices, maybe more, but I couldn't see anyone. "We are family," the ancient child voice said. "We take care of each other. No grown-ups, no rules, no going home." That's when I realized these weren't just lost children playing in the woods. Something was very, very wrong in Ramsey's draft, and I was right in the middle of it. I barely slept that night. Every time I dozed off, I'd hear rustling outside my tent. When morning came, I found small handprints pressed into the mud around my campsite. But they weren't normal handprints. The fingers were too long, and there were what looked like claw marks extending from each fingertip. I radioed for backup and spent the morning taking photographs and measurements. When my partner, Roy Davidson, arrived, he took one look at the prints and whistled low. "Never seen anything like that," he said. Roy was 52 and had been a ranger for 15 years. If he was puzzled, something was seriously wrong. "The scouts said they saw children moving on all 4s, I told him. Fast, up into the trees. "Feral kids?" Roy suggested. "Maybe runaways who've been living rough for months?" It was possible. Every year a few children disappeared from nearby towns. Most were found within days, but some never came home. The official reports usually blamed drowning or animal attacks, but bodies were rarely recovered. We decided to search for camps or shelters. If children had been living in these woods for months, they'd need some kind of shelter for winter. What we found was incredible. Hidden in a grove of massive oak trees, we discovered structures that looked like giant bird nests. They were woven from branches and lined with moss, each one perfectly round and about 6 feet across. But they weren't on the ground. They were built into the trees 20 or 30 feet up. "How'd they get up there?" Roy wondered. I examined the tree trunks. There were small gouges in the bark, like claw marks, leading up to each nest. "They climbed," I said. "But look at these marks. They're deep, deeper than fingernails should be able to make." We found 7 nests total, all empty but recently used. There were scraps of clothing caught on branches, modern fabrics but faded and torn like they'd been exposed to weather for years. Roy climbed up to examine one of the nests. "Patty," he called down, his voice strange. "You need to see this." I climbed up beside him. The nest was lined with soft materials, moss, leaves, and what looked like animal fur. But at the center was a collection of small bones, all picked clean. "Rabbit bones, mostly," Roy said. "But look at this." He pointed to one of the bones. "Teeth marks, human teeth marks." I felt sick. Maybe they don't have tools to hunt properly. "These aren't tool marks, Patty. These bones were gnawed on, like a dog with a bone." We climbed down in silence. As we gathered our equipment, Roy suddenly grabbed my arm. "Listen," he whispered. I held my breath. Very faintly I could hear singing. A child's voice, sweet and high, singing a lullaby I almost recognized. But the words were wrong, twisted somehow. Rockabye grown-ups in the treetops, when the wind blows down they will drop, and when they fall, we'll hear them call, but children will catch them, one and all. The singing stopped abruptly. Where did that come from? Roy asked. I pointed toward a thick stand of pine trees about 100 yards away. There, but I don't see anyone. We approached carefully, but found nothing except more claw marks on the tree trunks and a strange smell, like wet earth and old leaves, but with something else underneath. Something that reminded me of the small animal house at the zoo. That afternoon, we interviewed people in the nearest town, Bear Creek. Most folks were reluctant to talk, but an elderly woman named Emma Trent invited us in for coffee. "You're asking about the children," she said, before we could explain why we'd come. "Yes, ma'am. Have you heard anything about kids living wild in the forest?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. "My grandson Bobby went missing 3 years ago, 11 years old. Official reports said he drowned in Bear Creek, but they never found a body." "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. "Thing is," Emma continued, "I see him sometimes. In the woods. He looks exactly the same as the day he disappeared. Still 11 years old, but he runs from me now. Won't come when I call." Roy and I exchanged glances. Grief could make people see things that weren't there. "Mrs. Trent," Roy said gently, "people who've lost someone often think they see—" "I know what grief looks like, young man," Emma interrupted. "I've buried a husband and 2 sons. This is different. Bobby's alive, but he's not Bobby anymore." She walked to her window and pointed toward the forest. "They come to the edge of the woods sometimes, 5 or 6 children, all different ages. They watch the town. They're learning." "Learning what?" I asked. "How we live. Our routines. Our weaknesses." Emma turned back to us, and her eyes were frightened. Something took our children, changed them, and I think they're getting ready to take more. That evening, Roy and I set up a more permanent camp deeper in the wilderness. We had motion cameras, infrared equipment, and night vision goggles. If there were feral children in these woods, we'd find them. Around midnight, our motion detector started beeping. Something was moving through our perimeter. Roy grabbed the night vision goggles while I monitored the camera feeds. "I see them," he whispered. 4 small figures, moving between the trees. I looked at the camera monitors. The infrared picked up heat signatures, definitely human-sized, but moving in ways that didn't look human. They were traveling on hands and knees, but covering ground faster than a running adult. "They're circling us," Roy said, "just like you described." Then the whistling started. It was a signal system, different pitches and patterns coming from all directions. They were communicating, coordinating their movements. "Shine a light on them," I suggested. Roy turned on his powerful flashlight and swept it across the trees. For just a moment, it caught one of them full in the beam. It was a child, maybe 10 years old. But Emma was right. There was something terribly wrong. The child's hair hung in matted clumps past its shoulders. Its clothes were rags, and its fingernails had grown into claws at least 2 inches long. But it was the eyes that made my blood freeze. They reflected the light like an animal's eyes, bright yellow-green in the darkness. And when it smiled at us, I saw teeth that had been filed or worn into sharp points. The child tilted its head, studying us with those horrible glowing eyes. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound I'll never forget. A chittering, clicking noise like a cricket, but louder, much louder. The sound was answered from 6 different directions. "We need to go," Roy said, his voice tight with fear. "Right now." But as we started to pack up, we realized we were surrounded. Every few seconds, our flashlight would catch a glimpse of them, small figures crouched in the undergrowth, perched in low branches, or simply standing motionless between the trees, watching us with those glowing eyes. They weren't attacking. They were studying us. learning about us. And somehow that was much worse than any attack would have been. We didn't sleep that night. The children, if that's what they were, stayed at the edge of our light, watching and making those horrible clicking sounds. When dawn finally broke, they melted back into the deep woods like shadows. Roy looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "We need to call this in," he said. "Get some backup. Maybe the state police." But when we tried to radio headquarters, we got only static. Our equipment was working fine. Someone had cut our antenna cable during the night. The cuts were clean and precise, made with very sharp claws. They're smart, I realized. They know what our equipment does. We hiked back to the main road where Roy had parked his truck, planning to drive to town and call for help. But the truck wouldn't start. When Roy popped the hood, we saw that several wires had been chewed through. "Chewed," Roy said, holding up a severed wire. "Look at these marks. Definitely teeth." It was a 5-mile walk to Bear Creek. We started hiking, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were being followed. Every time I looked back, I saw nothing, but the forest felt alive with watching eyes. We made it to town just as the sun was setting. Roy used the payphone outside the general store to call our supervisor while I bought supplies. More batteries, extra food, a better radio. The store owner, an old man named Pete Wilson, watched me pile up my purchases. "Heading back into Ramsey's draft?" he asked. "How did you know?" "You got that look. Same look my son-in-law had before he went missing last month." Pete leaned across the counter. "Billy Hendricks went camping with some buddies. They found his campsite torn apart, but no sign of Billy. His friends swear something attacked them in the middle of the night. Something that moved too fast to see clearly." "What did they tell the police?" "Said it was probably a bear. But bears don't unwrap sleeping bags like Christmas presents, and they don't arrange the contents in perfect circles around the campsite." Pete pulled out a photograph from under the cash register. Billy's wife took this picture the day before he left. It showed a man in his 30s with a big smile holding up a fish he'd caught. Normal. Happy. Alive. "That was 3 weeks ago," Pete continued. 2 days ago, my neighbor saw Billy walking along the forest edge, naked, walking on his hands and knees like a dog. When she called to him, he looked up at her and ran into the woods. I felt that familiar chill. "Are you sure it was him?" 27-year-old man with a scar on his left shoulder from a motorcycle accident. "Yeah, it was Billy. But something's happened to him. Something bad." Roy finished his phone call and came over. "Supervisor's sending a team tomorrow morning. We're supposed to wait in town tonight." But I couldn't wait. Every hour we delayed, those children, or whatever they were, got bolder. And if they were somehow changing adults like Billy Hendricks, I'm going back, I decided. Tonight. "Patty, that's crazy. We should wait for backup." "What if they take someone else while we're sitting here drinking coffee? What if there's a family camping up there right now?" Roy sighed. "Then I'm coming with you." We borrowed Pete's truck and drove back to the forest as darkness fell. This time, we came prepared. Flares, extra flashlights, a signal horn, and a shotgun Roy had brought from his personal collection. "Remember," I told him as we hiked into the woods, "these might still be children, lost, scared children who've been living wild. We don't shoot unless our lives are in immediate danger." "Patty," Roy said quietly, "I don't think those are children anymore." We set up camp in a different location, hoping to avoid the pack we'd encountered before. But within an hour of sunset, we heard the whistling signals starting up around us. They'd found us. This time, there were more of them. At least a dozen different voices calling back and forth through the darkness. And they were getting closer. "They're not afraid of us anymore," Roy observed, checking his shotgun. A child's voice called out from the darkness. "Ranger lady! We want to play!" I recognized the ancient-sounding voice from the night before. "What kind of game?" I called back. Giggling came from all directions. "Hide and seek. We hide, you seek. But if you find us, we get to keep you." "What does that mean, keep you?" "Like we kept Billy, like we kept Sarah, like we kept all the lost ones." Roy grabbed my arm. "Sarah Blackwood," he whispered. "Girl who went missing 2 years ago. She was 14. "Sarah," I called out. "Sarah, are you out there?" A different voice answered, higher and more childlike. "I'm here. I'm always here. I can't leave. I can't go home." The voice was coming from directly above us. Roy and I both pointed our flashlights up into the trees. A teenage girl crouched on a thick branch about 20 feet up. But like the others, something was horribly wrong with her. Her hair was a tangled mess reaching nearly to the ground. Her clothes were rotten rags, and she was perched on that branch like a bird, balanced perfectly on the balls of her feet. "Sarah?" I said gently. "Sarah, my name is Patty. I'm here to help you get home." The girl tilted her head exactly like the child had done the night before. "Home?" she said, and her voice was confused, like she didn't understand the word. "Your parents, Sarah. They miss you. They want you to come back." "Parents." She tested the word. "Parents. I remember. I remember crying for them. But the crying stopped. The leader made it stop." "Who's the leader?" Sarah smiled, and I saw that her teeth had been filed to points, just like the others. "The first lost. The one who teaches us to hunt. The one who shows us how to make the grown-ups into children." She suddenly dropped from the branch, landing in a crouch next to our campfire. Up close, I could see that her fingernails had grown into claws, and her eyes reflected the firelight like an animal's. "You smell like caring," she said to me. "Like the mother feeling. The leader wants to meet you." Before I could respond, Roy raised his shotgun. "Stay back," Sarah hissed at him. Actually hissed like a cat. And suddenly, she wasn't alone. Children emerged from the darkness on all sides. Some I recognized as human, but changed. Others looked like they'd been wild for so long that they were barely human at all. And leading them was something that made my heart stop. It appeared to be a boy about 10 years old, but his eyes were ancient, older than Emma Trent's, older than anyone I'd ever seen. He wore rotting clothes that looked like they came from decades ago, knickers and a cotton shirt that might have been white once. "I am the leader," he said, and his voice carried the weight of years. "I was the first to choose the deep woods over the shallow world. Others followed. We are the children who never grew up because growing up means forgetting how to play." "How long have you been here?" I asked. "Since the trees were younger, since the world was louder. We came with a group of boys to learn about nature, but nature taught us more than our leaders intended." I realized he was talking about a Boy Scout expedition. But from how long ago? "We learned that grown-ups make rules because they are afraid," the leader continued. "Afraid of the wild, afraid of the dark, afraid of the truth that lives in the deep woods. But children are not afraid. Children can become anything." He gestured to his pack. "We take the lost ones, the lonely ones, the ones who wander too far from their campfires. We show them how to be free. By changing them into animals, by letting them become what they truly are, wild, free, eternal children who never have to face the sadness of growing old." Roy's gun was shaking in his hands. "You're kidnapping people, turning them into monsters." The leader's ancient eyes fixed on Roy. "Monsters. We are what humans were before they built walls and made laws and forgot how to hunt, before they forgot how to truly live." He made a soft clicking sound, and suddenly his pack moved as one. They began circling us, getting closer with each step. "The choice is simple," the leader said to me. "Join us willingly, and we will let your friend go free. Refuse, and we will take you both. But he will not survive the changing. Adults rarely do." I looked at Roy, seeing the fear in his eyes. Then I looked at Sarah and the other lost children who'd been twisted into these wild things. "I need to think about it," I said. The leader smiled with his pointed teeth. "You have until the moon reaches the treetops. Then we choose for you." Looking up, I saw the moon was about an hour from its highest point. 1 hour to figure out how to save Roy save myself, and somehow help these lost children. 1 hour before something unspeakable happened to both of us. The pack withdrew to the edge of our firelight, but they didn't leave. I could see their glowing eyes reflecting the flames as they crouched motionless in the darkness, waiting. "What's the plan?" Roy whispered, never taking his eyes off them. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but there's something wrong with their story. The leader says he's been here since the trees were younger. That could be decades. But he still looks like a 10-year-old boy. Maybe he's lying." "No, I think he's telling the truth. But something's keeping them from aging normally. Something in these woods." I studied the leader more carefully. His clothes were definitely old-fashioned, probably from the 1920s. And there was something else, a smell that came from his direction. The same earthy, animal smell we'd noticed before, but stronger now. "Sarah," I called softly, "how long have you been here?" The teenage girl crept closer to the firelight. "Long time. Forever time. Sun comes, sun goes. But always the same day." "Do you remember your parents' names?" She frowned like thinking was difficult. "Names fade, faces fade. Only the pack matters now." "What about before you joined the pack? What do you remember?" "Camping with friends. Got lost. Found the cave. Went inside to hide from rain. Then, changing. Becoming new." "What cave?" The leader hissed, and Sarah scuttled back into the darkness. But she'd given me the clue I needed. "There's a cave," I whispered to Roy. "Something in there is changing them." "Like what?" Before I could answer, one of the wild children spoke up. A boy who looked maybe 12, but with the same ancient eyes as the leader. "Time's up," he announced. "Moon's at the trees." I looked up. The moon had indeed reached the treetops. The leader rose from his crouch and walked into the firelight. "Your answer, mother-smelling one?" I stood up slowly, my mind racing. These children weren't evil. They were victims. Something had taken their humanity and trapped them in an eternal childhood nightmare. But they still had some memory of what they'd been. "I want to see the cave. First," I said. "If I'm going to become like you, I want to understand what's happening to me." The leader tilted his head, considering. "Very well. You will see where the changing happens. But your friend stays here with the pack. No deal. We go together or not at all." The ancient boy smiled. "You care for him. Good. Caring makes the changing more interesting." He made a clicking sound, and suddenly, the entire pack was moving. They surrounded Roy and me, staying just close enough that we couldn't run, and began leading us deeper into the forest. We walked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes. The trees grew thicker and older, and the darkness between them seemed almost solid. Finally, we came to a hillside where a cave mouth yawned like a hungry mouth. The smell was overwhelming now, wet earth and decay, but also something else. Something that reminded me of mushrooms and rotting logs. "In here," the leader said, "the deep woods keep their greatest secret." As we entered the cave, I noticed the walls were covered with a strange, spongy growth. It looked like fungus, but it pulsed gently, like it was breathing, and it glowed with a faint greenish light that made everything look diseased. "What is that?" Roy asked, pointing at the growth. "The heart of the deep woods," the leader replied. "It has been here longer than humans, longer than trees. It remembers when the world was wild." We went deeper, following tunnels that seemed designed for small bodies. Roy and I had to crawl in some places, but the children moved easily through passages that were clearly meant for them. The tunnels opened into a large chamber filled with the pulsing fungus. But this wasn't just growing on the walls. It covered everything. The floor, the ceiling, even the air seemed thick with floating spores that glowed in the dim light. And in the center of this chamber, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Cocoons. Dozens of them, made from the same fungal growth, each one roughly human-sized. Some were small, child-sized. Others were adult-sized. The changing chambers, the leader explained. This is where lost ones become found ones, where adults become children, where human becomes wild. One of the adult-sized cocoons was moving, pulsing like a heartbeat. I could hear muffled sounds from inside, someone trying to scream. "Billy Hendricks," Roy whispered. "He fought the changing," the leader said sadly. "Adults always fight, but the deep woods are patient. Soon he will forget why he wanted to leave. Soon he will be one of us." I felt sick, but I forced myself to stay calm. How does it work? The spores enter through the lungs. They rebuild the mind, removing the grown-up thoughts that cause sadness. They strengthen the body for life in the wild. And they connect all children to the pack mind, so no one is ever alone again. As he spoke, I noticed we were all breathing the spore-filled air. My head was starting to feel fuzzy, and Roy was swaying on his feet. "Roy?" I whispered. "Hold your breath." But it was too late. The spores were already in our systems. I could feel my thoughts becoming simpler, more childlike. The fear was fading, replaced by a strange sense of peace. This was how they got you. Not through violence, but through making you want to stay. "Feel it?" the leader asked gently. "The burden of adulthood lifting away? Soon you won't remember why you ever wanted to leave the deep woods." Roy's eyes were glazing over. "Patty," he mumbled, his voice slurring. "I feel strange, like I'm very young." I watched in horror as my partner began to change before my eyes. His face was becoming younger, more innocent. His posture was changing too, becoming more childlike. But something in me was fighting the spore's influence. Maybe it was my experience with lost children, or maybe it was sheer stubbornness, but I could feel my adult mind struggling to stay in control. "Leader," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I have a question. Ask soon-to-be sister. You've been here since the 1920s, haven't you? Your Boy Scout troop got lost in these woods." His ancient eyes sharpened. "Yes, we came to learn woodcraft. Instead, we learned freedom. But some of your troop wanted to go home, didn't they? Some of them tried to leave." For the first time, the leader looked uncertain. "A few were weak. They could not let go of the outside world." "What happened to them?" They died. The changing cannot be reversed once it begins. They chose death over eternal childhood. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't paradise. It was a prison. These children were trapped here, unable to grow up, unable to leave, unable to die naturally. They took others not out of malice, but out of desperate loneliness. "You're not free," I told the leader. "You're trapped, all of you." His face contorted with rage. "We are free, free from rules, free from sadness, free from the prison of growing old. But you can't choose to leave. You can't choose to grow up. You can't choose anything except what the spores tell you to choose. That's not freedom. That's slavery." The leader let out a shriek of fury and lunged at me with his claws. But I was ready for him. I'd been slowly backing toward the cave entrance, and now I turned and ran. Behind me I heard Roy cry out. The spores had him now. He was one of them. But maybe, if I could get help, if I could find some way to destroy the fungus. I burst out of the cave into the cool night air, gasping and trying to clear the spores from my lungs. The pack was after me, their howls and shrieks echoing through the forest. But I knew these woods better than they did. I'd been studying maps and trails for 4 years. I knew where every stream and ridge and hidden path led. I ran through the darkness, using every skill I'd learned as a ranger. Behind me, the children of the deep woods followed, no longer pretending to be human. I had to get help. I had to find a way to destroy that cave and free the trapped children. I had to save Roy before he was lost forever. But first, I had to survive the night. I ran through those dark woods for what felt like hours, the pack howling behind me like wild animals. But gradually their cries grew fainter. As we got farther from the cave, they seemed to lose energy, like they were connected to that fungus and couldn't stray too far from it. By dawn, I'd made it back to the main road. A passing trucker picked me up and drove me to the nearest town, where I called my supervisor and tried to explain what had happened. They didn't believe me, of course. Officially, Roy Davidson and the missing children were victims of a cave-in. A search team found the cave entrance collapsed, blocked by tons of rock and earth. They assumed everyone inside had been crushed, but I knew better. I'd triggered that collapse on purpose. You see, I didn't run straight to the road that night. First, I hiked to the fire tower on Sunset Ridge, where we kept emergency supplies. I took every stick of dynamite we had for clearing fallen trees from trails. Then I went back to that cave. The pack was inside, tending to Roy and the others in their fungal cocoons. They didn't expect me to return. Adults never came back once they'd escaped. They'd learned that from decades of experience. I set the charges quickly and quietly, then lit the fuse and ran. The explosion brought down half the hillside. Whatever that fungus was, whatever ancient thing had been trapping children in eternal childhood, it was buried under 1,000,000 tons of rock. The howls and screams that echoed through the forest that night still haunt my dreams. But I saved them in the only way I could. I gave them the choice their leaders, or couldn't, the choice to finally rest. Roy survived, sort of. They found him wandering the forest 3 days later, alive, but changed. The doctor said he'd suffered severe psychological trauma. His mind had regressed to that of a 7-year-old child. He lives in a care facility now. I visit him every month. He doesn't remember being a ranger or what happened in those woods. He thinks he's still a little boy, waiting for his parents to pick him up from summer camp. Maybe that's a mercy. I transferred to an urban park in Richmond where the worst dangers are drunk teenagers and unleashed dogs. I tell myself I'm safer here, surrounded by pavement and streetlights. But sometimes, late at night, I hear children's laughter in the distance. And when I wake up, there are small scratches on my arms that weren't there when I went to sleep. I think some of them got out before the cave collapsed. I think they're looking for me. And sometimes when I'm working with the lost children who wander into my park, I catch myself studying their eyes, looking for that ancient gleam that means they've been touched by something wild and hungry. Because the deep woods are vast, and there might be other caves, other places where the boundary between. My name is Samuel Redstone, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a park ranger at Jefferson National Forest for 12 years now, and I know these Kentucky mountains like the back of my hand. My daddy was a ranger here, and his daddy before him. The caves in Pine Mountain have been my second home since I was old enough to hold a flashlight. People always ask me why I spend so much time underground. The truth is, after my wife Sarah died in that car crash 3 years ago, the caves became the only place I could think straight. Down there in the dark, with just the sound of dripping water and my own breathing, I don't have to pretend I'm okay. My little girl Emma lives with her grandparents now. I see her on weekends, but I know she needs more than I can give right now. The caves don't judge. They just are. That's why when the call came in about missing spelunkers, I wasn't surprised they wanted me to lead the search. It was October 15th, 1979, and the leaves were just starting to turn. The morning air had that crisp bite that means winter's coming to the mountains. "Sam, we got a problem," said Sheriff Morton over the radio. "Group of 4 cavers went into Dead Man's Cave yesterday morning. Should have been out by dinner. Their families are worried sick." I knew Dead Man's Cave well. It's part of a big limestone system that runs under Pine Mountain. The Cherokee used to call this whole area something that meant homes of the Pale Death. But I never paid much attention to old stories. Caves are caves, rock and water and darkness. Nothing more mysterious than that. "Any of them experienced?" I asked, already gathering my gear. "The leader's got some training. Name's Mike Peterson. The others are college kids from Louisville. First time underground for most of them." I shook my head. Every year someone thinks they can just walk into a cave like it's a hiking trail. They don't. To understand that underground is a different world with different rules. One wrong turn, one loose rock, one flooded passage, and you're in serious trouble. I met Deputy Williams at the cave entrance an hour later. The mouth of Dead Man's Cave looks like a giant black smile in the mountainside, about 8 feet wide and maybe 6 feet tall. You can see about 20 feet in before the darkness swallows everything. Their cars are still here, Williams said, pointing to 2 vehicles parked by the trail. Keys are inside. Looks like they plan to be back before dark. I knelt down and checked the cave entrance. 4 sets of footprints going in, all wearing hiking boots. The prints were clear in the muddy ground near the opening. What bothered me was what I didn't see. No prints coming back out. Could be they got turned around, I said, more to myself than to Williams. Easy to do if you don't know the system. I'll go in and find them. But as I checked my equipment one more time, headlamp, backup lights, rope, first aid kit, emergency radio, something felt wrong. I've done dozens of cave rescues, and usually there's some sign of the missing people near the entrance. Dropped gear, footprints going different directions. Something. This was too clean. The forest around the cave was too quiet, too. Usually you hear birds, squirrels, something. But the woods felt empty, like all the animals had decided to be somewhere else. I radioed base camp. Going in now. If you don't hear from me in 6 hours, send backup. The first 100 yards of Dead Man's Cave are easy walking. The ceiling is high enough to stand up straight, and the floor is mostly smooth rock worn down by thousands of years of water flow. But I knew the cave got more complicated deeper in. Narrow passages, vertical drops, underground streams that could flood without warning. My headlamp beam cut through the darkness ahead of me. The air was cool and damp with that earthy smell all caves have. My footsteps echoed off the walls, but I couldn't hear anything else. No voices calling for help. No sounds of people moving around in the distance. After about 20 minutes of walking, I found the first sign of the missing group. A granola bar wrapper on the ground, the kind hikers carry for quick energy. Fresh enough that it hadn't gotten wet from cave moisture yet. I was on the right track. The cave started getting narrower. The walls closed in from about 8 feet apart to maybe 4 feet. The ceiling dropped down too, so I had to duck my head in places. This is where inexperienced cavers start making mistakes. They panic when the space gets tight. They forget to watch where they're going. That's when I saw the first thing that made my blood run cold. Scratches in the rock wall, long, deep gouges that looked like claw marks. But they were too big to be from any animal I knew. And they were fresh. The limestone still looked white where something had scraped it. I stopped and played my light over the marks. 4 parallel scratches, each about as long as my finger and deep enough that I could feel them when I ran my hand over the rock. The pattern repeated every few feet along the wall, always at the same height, about 7 feet up. What kind of animal makes marks that high on a cave wall? And what was it doing in here? I followed the scratch marks deeper into the cave. The passage opened up again into a chamber about the size of my living room. The ceiling curved up into darkness above my headlamp beam. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, making a steady ping-ping-ping sound. That's where I found their equipment. 4 backpacks sat in a neat row against one wall, not scattered like they'd been dropped in a hurry, not torn open like animals had gotten into them, just sitting there like someone had carefully placed them. I opened the first pack. Mike Peterson, according to the driver's license in the wallet. Everything was still inside. Food, water bottle, extra batteries for his headlamp, cave map. Nothing missing that I could see. The other 3 packs were the same. All their supplies were there. Their headlamps were sitting on top of the packs, and when I tested them, the batteries were still good. The beams were bright and steady. "Hello," I called out. My voice echoed off the cave walls and came back to me 3 or 4 times before fading away. "Mike Peterson, can you hear me?" Nothing. Just the sound of dripping water. I keyed my radio. "Base camp, this is Sam. Found their gear in the main chamber. Packs are all here, but no sign of the people. Continuing search." Static answered me. Then William's voice, scratchy and hard to hear. "Copy that, Sam. How? Equipment? Condition?" "Equipment's fine," I said. "Looks like they just set everything down and walked away." But that didn't make sense. No experienced caver leaves their main supplies behind. Even if you're just exploring a side passage, you take your headlamp and some water. The cave system under Pine Mountain goes on for miles in some directions. You don't wander around in the dark without light and supplies. I studied the chamber more carefully. 3 passages led out of the main room, the one I'd come through from the entrance. 2 others heading deeper into the mountain. One sloped down steeply, the other stayed level but curved to the right so I couldn't see where it went. Which way had they gone? I got down on my hands and knees and searched the floor with my light. The rock was worn smooth in most places, but near the entrance to the sloping passage I found scuff marks in the dirt, boot prints, heading down. I also found something else. Short white hairs, almost like fur but thicker, coarse like steel wool. I picked up a few strands and put them in my pocket. Maybe the lab boys could tell me what kind of animal they came from. The sloping pass. Sage was tight. I had to crawl on my belly in some places, pushing my equipment bag ahead of me. The walls pressed in on both sides, and the ceiling scraped my back even when I kept my head down. This was no place for beginners. After maybe 50 feet of crawling, the passage opened up again. I stood up and stretched my back, playing my light around the new chamber. This one was bigger than the first, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness above me. And that's when I heard it. A voice. Faint and far away, but definitely human. Help. Please. Help us. The sound seemed to come from above me, which was impossible. I was deep underground. There shouldn't be anything above me but solid rock. Hello, I called back. Where are you? The voice came again, weaker this time. Down here. Can't. Please. I played my light up toward the ceiling, looking for cracks or openings where sound might carry through. The beam lit up smooth limestone walls rising 20 or 30 feet above me. No openings that I could see. But there was something else up there. Dark stains on the rock, like something had been smeared on the walls. Old stains by the look of them, but I couldn't tell what they were. Keep talking, I yelled. I'm coming to find you. No answer this time. I searched the chamber for another passage, another way to go deeper or higher. The only exit was a narrow crack in the far wall, maybe 2 feet wide and 4 feet high. I'd have to crawl again, but it looked like the only way forward. That's when my headlamp started acting up. The beam flickered once, twice, then went out completely. I was in total darkness. The kind of black you only find deep underground, so complete you can't tell if your eyes are open or closed. I fumbled for my backup light, trying not to panic. 12 years of caving, and I'd never had both lights fail at the same time. The backup clicked on, throwing blessed white light around the chamber. But in that brief moment of darkness, I'd heard something, a sound like fingernails scratching on rock, scraping, moving, sounds coming from the walls around me. When the light came back on, everything looked the same as before. Empty chamber, limestone walls, that narrow crack leading deeper into the cave. But the feeling was different, like I wasn't alone anymore. I changed the batteries in my main headlamp and tested it. The light worked fine now, bright and steady. Maybe just a loose connection from crawling through the tight passage. But as I headed toward the crack in the wall, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Fresh scratch marks on the walls, the same parallel gouges I'd seen earlier, but these ones hadn't been here when I first entered the chamber. Something had made those marks while I was fumbling with my lights, something that could move in complete darkness. I squeezed through the crack in the wall, trying not to think about the fresh scratch marks. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I'd missed seeing them the first time. Maybe my light had been at the wrong angle. But I knew what I'd seen. Empty walls that suddenly had claw marks. The passage beyond the crack opened into the biggest chamber yet. My headlamp beam couldn't reach the far walls or the ceiling. The space felt huge, like standing inside a cathedral made of stone. Water trickled somewhere in the darkness, and the air moved slightly, suggesting the chamber connected to the surface somehow. That's where I found Mike Peterson. He was hanging upside down from the ceiling, 30 feet above the cave floor. His body turned slowly in the air currents, and at first I thought he was dead. Then he opened his eyes and looked down at me. "Sam." His voice was weak but clear. "Sam Redstone?" "Mike, hold on. I'm getting you down." I could see now that he was wrapped in something white and sticky, like a cocoon. Only his head and shoulders were free. Rope hung down from where he was attached to the ceiling. But it wasn't climbing rope. It looked organic, like spider silk, but much thicker. "Don't come closer," Mike said. "They're waiting for you to get underneath me." "Who's waiting? Where are the others?" "Dead." His voice broke. "Lisa and Tommy and Jim. They're all dead. The things drained them dry and hung them up like meat in a freezer." I played my light around the ceiling and saw them. 3 more cocoons hanging in the darkness, smaller than Mike's. The bodies inside didn't move. "What things, Mike? What did this to you?" "They look like people, but white. Pale as bone. They move on the ceiling like spiders. They grabbed us when we were sleeping." He coughed, and I could see dark stains around his mouth. "Blood. They feed on blood, Sam. That's what they do. And they're still here." As if his words were a signal, I heard movement above me. Scratching sounds, like claws on rock. I aimed my light up toward the ceiling and saw something that made my legs weak. A human shape clung to the stone ceiling, but it was wrong in every way. Too tall, maybe 7 feet if it stood up. Arms and legs too long and thin. Skin white as paper, so pale I could see dark veins underneath. Its head turned toward my light, and I saw huge black eyes that reflected the beam like an animal's. It moved across the ceiling in a way that hurt to watch, flowing like liquid but gripping the rock with fingers that ended in long black claws. More scratching sounds came from other parts of the ceiling. There were others up there, hiding in the darkness beyond my light. "Run, Sam," Mike whispered. "They've been waiting for someone to come looking for us. That's what they do. They take a few people, then wait for the rescue team." One of the creatures dropped from the ceiling and landed 20 feet away from me. It crouched low on all 4s, but I could see it was built like a person. A horribly changed person. Its mouth opened, showing teeth that were too sharp and too many. I backed toward the passage I'd come from, but heard more scratching sounds behind me. They'd surrounded me while I was distracted by Mike. "The light!" Mike called down. "They don't like bright light. That's why they took our headlamps first." I pulled out my backup flashlight and turned it on too, holding both lights in front of me. The creature that had dropped down hissed and backed away, covering its eyes with those long clawed hands. More hissing from above. The things on the ceiling moved away from my lights, but I could hear them circling, staying just outside the beams. "There's a passage behind you," Mike said. "About 10 feet to your left. It leads to another chamber, but I don't know if it goes to the surface." I started backing toward where he'd indicated, keeping both lights moving to cover as much area as possible. The creatures followed me, always just at the edge of the light. I could hear them breathing, a wet, raspy sound that didn't seem quite human. Behind me, my foot found the opening to the passage. It was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide. I'd have to crawl, which meant I couldn't keep the lights pointed behind me. "Mike, I'm going for help. I'll come back for you." "Don't," he said. "There are too many of them. And they're smart, Sam. They learn. Next time, they'll be ready for the lights." I heard something moving fast across the ceiling, heading for my position. Without thinking, I dove into the narrow passage and started crawling as fast as I could. Behind me, something hissed in frustration, and claws scraped on rock where I'd been standing. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow I had to push my equipment ahead of me and squeeze through sideways. My lights flickered and bounced as I crawled, throwing crazy shadows on the walls. I expected to feel claws grab my legs at any second. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I emerged into another chamber. This one was smaller, and I could see multiple passages leading out in different directions. I had no idea which way led back to the surface. I tried my radio. "Base camp, this is Sam. Emergency situation. 4 people missing in Dead Man's Cave system. Need backup." Immediately. Static. Then William's voice, very faint. Sam. Can't. Signal weak. What's happening? Send help, I said into the radio. And bring lots of lights. Spotlights, floodlights, everything you can carry. The radio crackled and went dead. I was alone in the dark with things that had already killed 3 people and were keeping Mike alive for some reason I didn't want to think about. I had maybe 6 hours of battery life left between my 2 lights, and I didn't know the way out. That's when I heard the scratching sounds again, coming from the passage I'd just crawled through. They were following me, and they were learning to move through the narrow spaces. I picked the largest passage and started moving, trying to stay quiet. Behind me, the scratching sounds got closer. These things were faster in tight spaces than I was, moving like they were made for crawling through rock. The passage sloped upward, which gave me hope I might be heading toward the surface. But after 10 minutes of climbing, it leveled out and opened into another chamber. This one was different from the others. The walls were covered in white stuff that looked like silk or cotton, but it smelled wrong. Sweet and rotten at the same time. And there were shapes in the white covering, human shapes, dozens of them. I counted at least 20 cocoons hanging from the walls and ceiling, all at different stages. Some looked fresh, with the person inside still moving weakly. Others were old and empty, just dried husks hanging in the white silk. This wasn't just about Mike Peterson's group. People had been disappearing in these caves for a long time. At the far end of the chamber, something huge moved in the shadows. I aimed both my lights at it and saw what had to be the mother of all the pale creatures. She was the size of a small car, with the same white skin and black eyes, but her body was swollen and wrong. Egg-shaped lumps covered her belly, pulsing with their own light. She was laying eggs, or worse, making new pale crawlers. When my lights hit her, she turned toward me and opened her mouth. The sound that came out wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite words, but somehow I understood what she meant. Welcome. You will help us grow. The voice was inside my head, not coming through my ears. Pictures flashed in my mind, the pale crawlers spreading through the cave system, moving up to the surface, hunting in the forests at night, taking people from campgrounds and hiking trails, growing their numbers. And I saw something else, a picture of a little girl with dark hair and eyes like mine. Emma. We know where she lives, the voice said. We know where you all live. Rage hit me harder than fear. These things were threatening my daughter. They'd killed innocent people and were planning to kill more. I'd brought more than lights into the cave. In my equipment bag was the emergency flare gun we used for cave rescues, plus 3 flares. I pulled it out and loaded a flare. Stay away from my family, I said out loud. The queen creature laughed inside my head. You cannot stop us. We have been here longer than your people. This mountain is ours. I fired the flare at her. The flare hit the egg-covered belly and exploded in a burst of red light and flame. The queen screamed, a real sound this time, loud enough to shake rocks from the ceiling. The eggs on her belly caught fire, burning with a terrible smell. All around the chamber, the cocoons started moving as the people trapped inside woke up. Some of them were still alive after who knows how long. The queen thrashed in the burning silk, and I heard answering screams from the passages around me. Every pale crawler in the cave system was coming. I loaded another flare and started cutting down cocoons with my knife. Most of the people inside were too weak to move, but a few could still walk. An old man who might have been missing for years, a teenage girl who looked like she'd been taken recently. Can you walk? I asked the girl. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. We're getting out of here. Follow me and don't look back. I fired my second flare into the silk covering the walls. The whole chamber started burning, and the pale crawlers' screams got louder. They were afraid of fire, even more than light. But there were so many of them. Dozens poured into the chamber from every passage, staying just outside the firelight, but getting closer as the flames started to die down. I had 1 flare left. The old man grabbed my arm. There's another way, he wheezed. Behind the queen. Passage goes up to the old mine shaft. I looked where he pointed, past the burning queen creature, almost hidden by smoke and flame. I could see a crack in the wall. "Take the girl and go," I told him. "I'll be right behind you." But we all knew that wasn't true. Someone had to hold off the pale crawlers long enough for the others to escape. Someone had to make sure these things didn't follow us to the surface. I thought about Emma, safe with her grandparents, but not safe enough. Not if these things got out of the cave. I loaded my last flare and faced the army of pale crawlers creeping toward us through the smoke. The old man was right about the passage. It led up through the rock, steep and narrow, but heading toward the surface. I could feel fresh air moving down from above, and after 20 minutes of climbing, I saw something I'd never been so happy to see in my life. Daylight. The passage ended at the bottom of an old mine shaft that had been abandoned since the 1940s. Rusty iron rungs were bolted to the rock wall, leading up about 40 feet to the surface. Some of the rungs were broken or loose, but enough remained to climb. The girl made it up first. She was young and light, and fear gave her strength. The old man went slower, but he knew these mountains. He'd been trapped in the caves for 3 years, he told me. 3 years of being kept barely alive while those things fed on him. I went last, listening for sounds of pursuit from below. But the passage stayed quiet. Maybe the fire had stopped them. Maybe they'd given up. Or maybe they were just waiting for dark. We emerged from the mine shaft into late afternoon sunlight. The girl collapsed on the ground, crying and shaking. The old man sat down heavily on a fallen log, looking like he might not get up again. I tried my radio and got a clear signal. "Base camp, this is Sam. I'm at the old Wilson mine shaft with 2 survivors. Need medical evacuation immediately." "Sam!" William's voice was loud and clear. "Where the hell have you been? We've been trying to reach you for 6 hours." "Long story. Just get ambulances up here and bring every light you can find. Spotlights, generators, everything. And seal off Dead Man's Cave. Nobody goes in there." "What about the missing cavers?" I looked back at the mine shaft. Smoke was still coming up from below, and I could smell that terrible, sweet, rotten stench. "They're gone, Williams. All except these 2. The rescue teams found us an hour later. They took the girl and the old man to the hospital in town. Both of them would recover, the doctor said, though they'd need time to deal with what had happened to them. I filed my report 3 days later. Equipment malfunction led to the deaths of 4 cavers. Gas leak caused hallucinations and disorientation. The 2 survivors were found in a natural cave opening that connected to the mine shaft. The Park Service sealed Dead Man's Cave with concrete and steel barriers, posted signs warning about unstable rock and toxic gases. They also sealed the mine shaft and 2 other cave entrances in the area. It was the best I could do. I requested a transfer to a different forest, somewhere far from Cavo and underground places. Somewhere Emma could visit without me worrying about what might be watching from dark places. But I still wake up some nights thinking I hear scratching sounds in the walls of my house. And sometimes, when I'm driving the mountain roads after dark, I think I see pale shapes moving in the trees. The Park Service says Dead Man's Cave is sealed forever. They say nothing could survive down there after the fire. I hope they're right. But 3 weeks ago, a family camping at Pine Mountain reported that their 6-year-old daughter talked to the white people who live in the ground. She said they asked her lots of questions about where she lived and went to school. The family thought it was just her imagination. I'm not so sure. I sleep with the lights on now. All the lights in the house, every night. Emma thinks it's silly when she visits, but she doesn't complain. She doesn't know that sometimes, late at night, I see pale faces pressed against the windows. She doesn't know that I've started carrying a gun loaded with flare rounds wherever I go. And she doesn't know that I've been having dreams about a voice in my head, promising that it's not over. That the Queen had sisters living deeper in the mountain. That they remember my face and my scent. That they're patient and they're hungry, and they know where we all live. The mountains are full of caves, and not all of them are on the maps. I just hope the lights are enough to keep them away. For now. My name is Joshua Thornberry, but everyone calls me Josh. I've been a forest ranger for 9 years now, and I thought I'd heard every sound these Kentucky woods could make. Boy, was I wrong. It started in July 1963, right here in the Daniel Boone National Forest. I work the night shift mostly, which suits me fine. I've always been a night owl, and someone needs to keep an eye on things when the sun goes down. The Red River Gorge is my area. All those old rock formations and deep valleys that tourists love during the day, but avoid after dark. I'm what you might call a sound expert. Spent years learning every call, every rustle, every whisper the forest makes. I can tell you if that hoot belongs to a great horned owl or a barred owl from half a mile away. In 1961, I even discovered a new type of owl that nobody had seen before. Named it Strix kentuckensis, the Kentucky owl. Got my name in a science journal and everything. That's why I wasn't worried when the reports started coming in. Campers talking about strange whistling sounds at night. Long musical notes that seemed to float through the trees. They said it sounded almost human, but not quite. Some folks got spooked and packed up early. Just wind through the rocks, I told my supervisor, Don Richards. These sandstone cliffs make all kinds of weird noises when the air pressure changes. Don nodded and handed me another report. 3 more groups mentioned it this week, Josh. Maybe you should check it out. I took my usual equipment, night vision scope, audio recorder, notebooks. I've got good hearing and better night vision than most people. If there was something out there making noise, I'd find it. The first night, I set up near Devil's Creek, where most of the reports came from. The area sits in a bowl between high rock walls, perfect for trapping and bouncing sound around. I figured that explained everything.
Kerptum. Around midnight, I heard it. The whistle started soft and low, like someone blowing gently across a bottle. But it held the note longer than any person could. Maybe 30 seconds of pure, clear sound. Then it stopped, and the whole forest went quiet. Not normal quiet, but dead quiet. No insects, no owls, no rustling leaves. Nothing. I grabbed my recorder and waited. The whistle came again, this time from a different direction. Then another and another. They seemed to be calling back and forth, having some kind of conversation in musical notes. My hands shook a little as I adjusted the recorder. In 9 years, I'd never heard anything like this. The sounds weren't coming from the rocks. They were coming from something alive. The whistling stopped as suddenly as it started. Normal forest sounds returned slowly, like someone gradually turning up the volume on nature. I played back my recording, but the whistles had somehow damaged my equipment. All I got was static and a high-pitched whine that hurt my ears. I drove home that night thinking hard. Maybe it was a new kind of bird, or some animal I hadn't encountered before. There had to be a logical explanation. But deep down, I already knew this was different. This was wrong. The next morning, Don called me into his office. His face was grim. "We found the Morrison family's campsite," he said. "They're the ones who reported the whistling 3 days ago." "Found it? What do you mean?" "Their tent's still set up, food's still on the table, sleeping bags laid out like they just stepped away for a minute." Don rubbed his forehead. "But they're gone, Josh. All 4 of them. Just vanished." I felt something cold creep up my spine. Could they have gotten lost? Wandered off in the dark? That's what we thought. But look at this. Don showed me a photo from the campsite. Personal items were scattered in a strange pattern. Car keys, wallets, shoes, all arranged in a perfect circle around the cold fire pit. People don't do that when they're lost or in a hurry. Any tracks? That's the weird part. Don pulled out another photo. These footprints lead away from the camp. They start human, but look at this. The prints in the photo made my stomach turn. They started as normal shoe prints, but as they moved away from the campsite, they changed. The prints got longer, wider, and there were marks between the toes, like webbing. "What the hell makes prints like that?" I whispered. Don shook his head. "That's what I need you to find out. You're our night expert, Josh. If there's something out there, you'll find it."
That evening, I loaded extra batteries for my equipment and drove back to Devil's Creek. The Morrison campsite was empty now, marked off with yellow tape, but I could still see the circle of scattered belongings. As I set up my gear, I tried to think like a scientist. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe the Morrisons had played some kind of prank before leaving. Maybe those footprints belonged to a person wearing homemade flippers as a joke. But as darkness fell and the first whistle echoed through the trees, I knew I was lying to myself. Something was out there. Something that could make sounds no human throat could produce. Something that could make people disappear without a trace. And it was calling to me. The second night, I brought backup. My partner, Steve Walsh. Steve's a good ranger, been working days for about 5 years. He volunteered for night duty when I told him about the whistling. Probably just teenagers messing around, Steve said as we hiked to Devil's Creek. You know how kids are. They hear about something spooky and decide to add to the legend. I wanted to believe him, but when the first whistle floated through the darkness, Steve's face went white. Jesus, he whispered. That's not human. The sound was closer this time, maybe 100 yards away, long and musical like a flute made of wind and water. It held the note for almost a minute, then faded into silence. There, I pointed toward a thick stand of pine trees. It came from over there. We moved carefully through the underbrush, flashlights off, using only moonlight to see. Steve stayed close behind me, breathing hard. The normal forest sounds had stopped again. That unnatural quiet that made every footstep sound like thunder. 50 yards into the trees, we found something that made us both freeze. Another campsite. This one looked like it had been abandoned for weeks. The tent sagged with old rain and gear was scattered everywhere. But like the Morrison site, personal items were arranged in a perfect circle around the dead fire pit. How many people have gone missing? Steve asked, his voice barely a whisper. Before I could answer, the whistling started again. This time it came from 3 different directions at once, surrounding us. The sounds seemed to answer each other, weaving together into a melody that was beautiful and terrible at the same time. We need to get out of here, Steve said, but I couldn't move. The melody was doing something to my mind, making me feel calm and sleepy. My feet wanted to walk toward the sound, to follow it deeper into the forest. Josh! Steve grabbed my arm. Don't listen to it. He pulled me backward, away from the whistling. As soon as we put distance between ourselves and the sounds, my head cleared. I realized I'd been walking toward the trees without even knowing it. What the hell was that? I gasped. I don't know, but it was trying to make us follow it. Steve's hands were shaking, just like it made those campers follow it. We hiked back to our truck in silence, constantly looking over our shoulders. The whistling continued behind us, growing fainter, but never completely stopping. It sounded like it was following us, staying just out of sight. Back at the ranger station, I pulled out maps of the area and started marking every location where whistling had been reported. The pattern that emerged made my blood run cold. All the sites followed the underground water system. Devil's Creek, Whistling Springs, Echo Valley, every place connected by streams and underground rivers that flowed through the limestone caves beneath the forest. It's using the water, I told Steve. Whatever's making these sounds, it's moving through the cave system. Steve studied the map. So it could pop up anywhere there's water? Looks like it. I traced the underground rivers with my finger. And there's water everywhere in this forest. The next day, I drove to the town library and spent hours reading old newspaper articles and local history books. What I found made me wish I'd never started looking. The Cherokee who lived here before white settlers arrived had stories about creatures they called water singers. According to their legends, these beings lived in underwater caves and used beautiful songs to lure people to their deaths. The Cherokee warned their children never to follow mysterious singing near water, especially at night. In 1889, a newspaper reported that 6 children had vanished near Whistling Springs after following ghost music into the forest. In 1923, 3 fishermen disappeared from Echo Valley, leaving behind only their arranged belongings in a circle. Every 20 or 30 years, People vanished, always near water, always after hearing impossible music in the dark. I was starting to understand that this wasn't just some unknown animal. This was something that had been hunting people for over a century. That evening, Don Richards decided to see the whistling for himself. "I need to know what we're dealing with," he said. "I've got tourists asking questions and families demanding answers." "Don, I don't think that's a good idea. This thing, whatever it is, it affects your mind. Makes you want to follow it. That's why I'm bringing backup." Don showed me his radio and emergency whistle. "I'll stay in contact. If something is wrong, you'll know." I wanted to argue, but Don was my supervisor. He had the right to investigate his own forest. He never came back. We found his truck parked at Whistling Springs the next morning. His radio was dead, his emergency whistle was missing, and his footprints led straight into the water. The prints started human-sized at the truck, but by the time they reached the stream, they were longer and wider, with that same webbing between the toes. Steve and I followed the prints to the water's edge, but they disappeared into the dark stream that flowed down into underground caves. "We have to go after him," Steve said. "With what? We don't have diving gear, and those caves could go on for miles underground." But Steve was already putting on his backpack. "I'm going in. Don might still be alive down there." "Steve, wait." He ignored me and waded into the stream. The water was only waist deep, but the current was strong. I watched him duck under a low overhang and disappear into the cave system. I waited by the water for 6 hours. When Steve finally emerged, I almost didn't recognize him. His skin was pale and cold. His eyes were different, bigger somehow, and they reflected light like an animal's. When he opened his mouth to speak, the only sound that came out was a long musical whistle. He tried to grab my hand and pull me toward the water, but I backed away. Steve kept whistling, making the same beautiful sounds I'd been hearing in the forest. He wanted me to follow him, to come into the water. Instead, I ran. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Steve's whistling. Not the normal Steve who cracked jokes and complained about paperwork, but this new Steve who moved like he was swimming, even on dry land. 3 days passed. I called in sick and spent the time reading everything I could find about underwater cave systems and underground river, as I needed to understand what was happening to people down there. The more I learned, the more terrified I became. The cave system under the Red River Gorge was huge, miles of underwater, tunnels connecting dozens of springs and streams. Some caves had never been fully explored because they were too deep or too dangerous, perfect places for something to hide. On the 4th night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know what happened to Don and Steve. I had to know what was down there in the dark water. I drove to a cave entrance about 2 miles from Whistling Springs. This one was dry, just a narrow opening in the rocks that led to a system of air-filled tunnels. Local cavers had mapped some of it, and according to their charts, it connected to the underwater areas where Don and Steve had disappeared. I brought every piece of equipment I could carry: powerful flashlights, rope, my audio recorder, and an emergency whistle that made a high-pitched shriek. If the water singers used sound to hunt, maybe I could use sound to fight back. The cave was tight and cold. I had to crawl on my belly for the first 100 yards, following a passage barely wide enough for my shoulders. The smell was wrong, not the clean mineral scent of most caves, but something organic and rotten like old fish. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam disappeared into black space that seemed to go on forever. I could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance, and underneath that, something else. Singing. Not the whistling I'd heard in the forest, but actual voices singing in harmony. The melody was beautiful and sad, like a lullaby for the dying. It echoed off the cave walls until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I followed the sound deeper into the cave, staying close to the wall so I wouldn't get lost. The singing got louder as I moved, and I started to recognize one of the voices. Steve. He was down there, singing with whatever had taken him. The thought made me sick, but I kept going. Maybe I could still save him. The tunnel sloped downward, and soon I could see light ahead. Not electric light, but a cold blue glow, like moonlight underwater. The singing was very close now, and I could make out words in the melody. Not English words, but something older, more basic. The sounds of water and hunger and dark places where the sun never reached. I crept to the edge of the light and looked down into a huge underground lake. The blue glow came from somewhere deep in the water, casting wavering shadows on the cave ceiling 50 feet above. And there, sitting on rocks at the water's edge, were Don and Steve. At least, they had been Don and Steve once. Their skin was pale green and wet-looking, even out of the water. Gills opened and closed along their necks, and their fingers were longer, with webbing stretched between them. They still looked human, but changed, adapted for life underwater. They weren't alone. Dozens of other figures sat around the underground lake, all singing in that strange, beautiful language. Some looked like they had been human once. I could see the remains of clothing, a watch on one wrist, glasses on a pale face. Others were less human, more fish-like, as if they'd been changed longer ago. At the center of the lake, something large moved in the deep water. I caught glimpses of it in the blue glow, smooth skin, massive size, appendages that could have been arms or tentacles. The thing that was controlling all of this. The singing stopped. Every head turned toward my hiding place. Dozens of large, reflective eyes stared at me in the darkness. Don and Steve smiled with mouths full of sharp teeth. Then they all began to whistle. The sound hit me like a physical force, making my knees weak and my vision blur. I felt that same compulsion I'd experienced in the forest, the overwhelming need to go to them, to join their singing, to slip into the dark water and let to change me. I fumbled for my emergency whistle and blew it as hard as I could. The high-pitched shriek echoed through the cave, and the whistling stopped instantly. The creatures clutched their heads and writhed in pain. The thing in the deep water thrashed violently, sending waves crashing against the rocky shore. I blew the whistle again and again, backing toward the tunnel. The creatures scattered, diving into the water or crawling into side passages to escape the sound. Even Don and Steve fled, their new bodies moving like seals as they slipped beneath the surface. But I'd made a mistake. In my panic, I'd lost track of which tunnel I'd come from. I was alone in a maze of cave passages with my flashlight dying, and no idea how to get out. The whistling started again, softer now but coming from every direction. They were hunting me in the dark, herding me deeper into the cave system where I'd never find my way back to the surface. My light flickered and went out. In the complete darkness, I could only follow the sound of moving water. My hands traced along wet cave walls while the whistling grew stronger behind me. They weren't rushing. They knew I was trapped. They could take their time. I stumbled into another chamber and felt a current of air on my face, fresh air coming from somewhere above. I climbed toward it, feeling for handholds in the rock, scraping my knees and elbows raw. The air current led to a narrow chimney that rose straight up through the stone. I could see stars far above, maybe 50 feet of climbing to reach the surface. I started up, jamming my back against one wall and my feet against the other. Halfway up, I heard them enter the chamber below. Wet sounds, like fish flopping on rocks. The whistling echoed up the chimney, trying to make me let go and fall back down to them. I kept climbing. When I finally pulled myself out of the cave, dawn was breaking over the forest. I was miles from where I'd started, somewhere near Echo Valley. My truck was back at the other entrance, assuming I could even find it again, but I'd learned something important. The creatures were vulnerable to high-pitched sounds. Maybe there was a way to fight them after all. I hiked to the nearest road and called for backup from the ranger station. While I waited, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. The thing in the lake was old, older than the Cherokee stories, older than human settlement in Kentucky. It had been down there for centuries, maybe longer, slowly collecting people and changing them into something that could survive in its underwater world. But why now? Why were more people disappearing? The answer came to me as I saw a news report on the radio in the rescue truck. Scientists were talking about climate change, about how the environment was shifting faster than ever before. Maybe the creature sensed that changes were coming. Maybe it was building an army of hybrids to survive whatever happened next. Or maybe it was just hungry. Either way, I couldn't let it continue. Don and Steve were lost. I'd seen what they'd become, but I could stop it from taking anyone else. That night, I went back. This time I brought equipment I'd borrowed from the county emergency services. Underwater scuba gear, waterproof lights, and most importantly, an underwater speaker system designed for marine research. I also brought every emergency whistle I could find. The plan was simple and probably suicidal. Get into the underground lake, use the high-pitched sounds to drive the creatures away from the deep water, then collapse the tunnel system to trap the main entity in its lair. I had enough explosives, borrowed from the highway department, to bring down half the cave system. The plan would probably kill me too, but it might be the only way to stop the disappearances. I entered through the same dry cave I'd used before, but this time I knew the way. The scuba gear was heavy and awkward in the narrow tunnels, but I managed to reach the underground lake without alerting the creatures. The blue glow was dimmer now, and I could see fewer figures around the water's edge. Maybe they were afraid after my last visit, or maybe they were hiding, waiting for me. I slipped into the water as quietly as possible and swam toward the center of the lake where I'd seen the large creature. The underwater speaker went with me, along with a recording I'd made of every high-pitched sound I could think of. Whistles, alarms, feedback from audio equipment. 50 feet down, I found it. The thing was massive, maybe 30 feet long, with smooth skin and appendages that ended in what looked like human hands. Its head was a nightmare combination of fish and person, with intelligent eyes that watched me approach. It didn't attack. Instead, it began to sing. Even underwater, the sound was beautiful and hypnotic. I felt my resolve weakening, my hands reaching toward the creature, as if it was an old friend. The song promised peace, rest, transformation into something better than human. I turned on the speaker. The high-pitched sounds exploded through the water like depth charges. The creature writhed in agony, its song turning into a shriek of pain. Around the lake, I could see the hybrids fleeing into side tunnels, abandoning their creator. I kept the sounds playing and swam back toward the surface, pulling the explosives behind me. The creature followed, desperate to stop the noise that was driving it mad. It reached for me with those horrible human hands just as I triggered the charges. The explosion threw me against the cave wall and knocked me unconscious. When I woke up, I was floating in much shallower water. The blast had collapsed most of the tunnel system and drained the deep lake. I never found the creature's body. Maybe it was buried under tons of rock, or maybe it escaped through some passage I didn't know about. But the blue glow was gone, and the singing had stopped. It took me 6 hours to find my way out of the collapsed cave system. When I finally reached the surface, search and rescue, teams were looking for me. I'd been missing for 2 days. Don and Steve were found a week later, wandering naked through the forest near Whistling Springs. They were alive, but changed. The gills had closed up, leaving only scars, but their fingers remained webbed and their eyes still reflected light in the dark. They didn't remember much about their time underground. Don said he recalled following beautiful music and feeling completely peaceful. Steve talked about swimming in warm blue water and never wanting to leave. Neither of them could stand the sound of running water anymore. The official report blamed their condition on hypothermia and oxygen deprivation from being trapped in flooded caves. The webbed fingers were explained as a rare genetic condition that stress had somehow triggered. The reflecting eyes were dismissed as a trick of light. I didn't argue with the official story. I transferred to a ranger station in Arizona 2 months later. Desert country, where the only water comes from deep wells and the nearest cave is 100 miles away. I told everyone I needed a change of scenery after my traumatic experience. That was partly true, but mostly I moved because I could still hear them singing. On quiet nights, when the wind blows just right, I hear that beautiful, terrible melody. Sometimes it comes from storm drains or swimming pools. Once I heard it coming from my own kitchen faucet. The creature in the deep lake might be gone, but I don't think it was the only one. I think there are others, sleeping in underground rivers and flooded caves all over the world, waiting for the right time to start collecting people again. Last month I got a letter from a park ranger in Florida. She'd heard about my expertise with unusual wildlife sounds and wanted my advice. Campers in the Everglades were reporting strange whistling at night. People were disappearing near the water. I threw the letter away without answering. Some sounds are better left uninvestigated. Some things are better left sleeping in the dark water, far from the light of day. But on nights when the wind is still and I can hear my own heartbeat, I sometimes wonder, what if they're not sleeping anymore? What if they're all waking up? And what if next time they're smarter about avoiding high-pitched sounds? I keep a dozen emergency whistles by my bed just in case. But deep down, I know that if they really want to find me, all the whistles in the world won't be enough. The water always wins in the end. It just takes time. My name is Margaret Thornfield, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger at Mount Mitchell for 7 years now, and I know these mountains better than anyone. Mount Mitchell is the highest peak east of the Mississippi River, covered in thick forests that have been here since before people started counting years. I wasn't supposed to be here. When I first applied to be a ranger, the men in charge laughed. "A woman, in these dangerous mountains," they said. But I had a PhD in wildlife biology, and I knew more about bears and mountain lions than any of them. I fought for this job, and I earned it. Most people think I'm here because I love nature. That's partly true. But the real reason goes back to when I was 9 years old. My little brother Tommy was killed by what everyone said was a black bear. I found his body in the woods behind our house. Ever since then, I've needed to understand predators. I need to know how they think, how they hunt, why they kill. The Cherokee people who lived here first have stories about these mountains. They talk about something they call the White Shadow, a creature that comes every 7 years to hunt. The other rangers think it's just old stories, but I've learned to listen to the Cherokee elders. They know things about these woods that books can't teach you. It was a hot August morning when Jake Morrison called me on the radio. His voice was shaking, which was weird because Jake had been hiking these mountains for 20 years. "Ranger Thornfield, you need to get up to Craggy Dome Trail. Something killed my dog." I grabbed my gear, tranquilizer rifle, camera, measuring tape, and my field notebook, and hiked up to where Jake was waiting. He was sitting on a rock, staring at something in the bushes. His face was white as paper. "It wasn't a bear," he said before I could ask. "I've seen bear attacks. This was something else." I walked over to look at his dog, a big German shepherd named Rex. What I saw made my stomach turn. The dog's chest was caved in like it had been hit by a truck. But there were also claw marks, 4 deep gouges that went from the dog's neck to its belly. I took pictures and measurements. The claw marks were 6 inches apart, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. I looked around for tracks and found them pressed deep into the mud by the creek. They looked almost like human footprints, but they were 18 inches long and showed 5 toes with long claws. "Jake, tell me exactly what you saw." His hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette. "I was setting up camp when Rex started growling. He was looking up at those rocks over there. Then I saw it. Something white, moving through the trees. It was huge, maybe 12 feet tall, walking on 2 legs like a person. Rex ran toward it, barking. I heard him yelp once, then nothing. When I found him, he was like this." I wrote everything down in my notebook. In 7 years of tracking problem animals, I'd never seen anything like this. The tracks were too big for a black bear, and bears don't walk upright for long distances. There were no grizzly bears in North Carolina, and mountain lions don't have claws this big. "Did you see its face?" I asked. Jake shook his head. "It was too far away. But Maggie, I swear it looked at me, right at me, and then it just melted back into the trees like it was never there." I helped Jake carry Rex's body down the mountain and told him to report it to the local police. Then I went back up alone to study the scene more carefully. The sun was getting low, and the forest was starting to get that eerie quiet it gets before dark. That's when I found the white hair. It was caught on a broken branch about 8 feet off the ground. The hair was thick and coarse, almost like sheep's wool, but pure, white. I'd never seen anything like it. I put it in a plastic bag to send to the university lab. As I was packing up my gear, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It sounded like my brother Tommy calling my name, very faint, coming from deeper in the woods. Maggie, Maggie. I stood perfectly still, listening. The voice came again, definitely saying my name. But Tommy had been dead for 20 years. I was hearing things because I was tired and thinking about old memories. That's what I told myself as I hiked back down the mountain in the growing darkness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the trees. 3 days later, the lab results came back. Dr. Patricia Williams from the university called me herself. Maggie, I've never seen anything like this hair sample. The protein structure doesn't match any known North American mammal. Where exactly did you find this? I told her about the attack site. She was quiet for a long moment. I'd like to send this to a specialist in Atlanta. Can you get me more samples? That same day, another attack happened. This time it was at Rough Creek Falls, about 3 miles from where Jake's dog was killed. A family from Florida had been camping there. When the rangers found their campsite the next morning, it looked like a tornado had hit it. The tent was shredded and thrown up into a tree, 40 feet up, caught in the branches like a giant spider web. Sleeping bags and clothes were scattered everywhere. And in the middle of the campsite was a circle of stones with the family's food arranged in the center, like some kind of offering. The family was found 2 miles away, hiding in their car. The father, Mike Chen, could barely speak. "It came in the middle of the night," he whispered. "We heard our tent ripping, and then Sarah started screaming. I grabbed my flashlight and saw something huge standing over our campsite. It was white, like an albino gorilla, but it was standing up like a man. When my light hit it, it looked right at me with these blue eyes, human eyes." His wife, Sarah, was still shaking. "It threw our tent up into that tree like it weighed nothing. Nothing could be that strong, nothing natural." Their 8-year-old daughter hadn't spoken since they found her. She just stared at the woods and whispered "white monster" over and over. I spent the whole day at their campsite, taking pictures and looking for more evidence. The stone circle was arranged perfectly, too perfect for any animal to have made. And the way the food was placed in the center, canned goods stacked in a pyramid, fresh fruit arranged around them, it looked almost ceremonial. I found more tracks, and this time I made plaster casts. The footprints were definitely humanoid, but much larger than any person. The stride length was over 6 feet, which meant whatever made them had legs longer than any human. But the strangest thing was how the tracks just stopped at the edge of a cliff. There were clear prints leading right to the edge, and then nothing. It was like the creature had just jumped off a 200-foot drop, or maybe flown away. That evening, I drove to the Cherokee Reservation to talk to Joseph Stans Tall. Joseph was 83 years old and knew more about these mountains than anyone alive. His grandfather had been alive when the last Cherokee were forced to leave these lands, and the stories had been passed down through the generations. Joseph's trailer was at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by vegetable gardens and chicken coops. He was sitting on his porch, smoking a pipe when I pulled up. He looked at me with dark eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You're here about the white shadow," he said before I could speak. I sat down in an old wooden chair across from him. "Tell me what you know, Joseph." He puffed his pipe thoughtfully. "My great-grandfather told me the story. Long time ago, there was a Cherokee warrior named Nvi Uktena, White Serpent. He was proud, strong, the best hunter in the tribe. But pride is a dangerous thing." Joseph's voice got lower, more serious. "Nalvi fell in love with a woman who belonged to another man. When she rejected him, his heart turned black with anger. He went to a dark shaman, a man who dealt with evil spirits. The shaman gave him power to take what he wanted, but the power came with a curse." I leaned forward. "What kind of curse?" "The curse of the white shadow. Nvi was transformed into a creature of the night, neither man nor beast. He became huge and white as snow, with the strength of 10 men. But he was no longer human. The curse made him hungry, hungry for human flesh, human fear." Joseph pointed toward Mount Mitchell with his pipe. "Every 7 years, the white shadow must hunt.
7 victims in 7 nights during the new moon. If he doesn't feed, he dies. But if he completes the hunt, he lives another 7 years. My skin was crawling. Joseph, how many people have been attacked this week? He looked at me with sad eyes. How many do you think, Maggie Thornfield? I counted in my head. Jake's dog wasn't human, but Jake had been there. Then the Chen family. That was 3 people. 4, I whispered. Joseph nodded slowly. The white shadow needs 3 more, and he always saves the best for last. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Joseph had said, about the pattern of the attacks. I got out my maps and marked all the locations where there had been sightings of the white shadow over the years. The pattern was clear. Attacks every 7 years, always during the new moon in August, always exactly 7 victims. I was studying the maps when I heard something outside my cabin, a soft scratching sound like fingernails on wood. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door carefully. On my porch was a dead rabbit, arranged on its back with its paws folded over its chest like it was sleeping. Around it in a perfect circle were 7 white stones. The white shadow had been here. It knew where I lived, and I was starting to understand that I wasn't just investigating these attacks, I was being hunted. The next morning I called my supervisor and requested backup. Frank Dalton, a ranger from Grandfather Mountain, arrived that afternoon. Frank was 52, built like a truck, and had 20 years of experience dealing with dangerous wildlife. If anyone could help me figure this out, it was Frank. So, you think we're dealing with some kind of unknown primate? Frank asked as we hiked up to examine the latest attack site. I don't know what we're dealing with, I admitted, but it's smart, it's strong, and it's hunting people. Frank stopped walking and looked at me seriously. Maggie, in 20 years, I've never seen an animal that arranges rocks in circles or throws tents into trees. Animals don't play games with their food. We were examining the claw marks on a tree when we heard someone screaming down the trail. We ran toward the sound and found a teenage boy sitting in the dirt, crying and pointing up the mountain. It got Danny. The white thing got Danny. The boy's name was Marcus, and he and his friend Danny had been camping illegally in the backcountry. Marcus was so scared he could barely talk, but we got the story out of him. We were just sitting by our fire when we heard this sound, like a person trying to talk but not being able to make words right. Danny stood up to look, and this huge white thing came out of the trees. It was massive, maybe 10 feet tall, covered in white fur. But its face looked almost human. Marcus started crying again. It grabbed Danny and just walked away with him, like Danny was a rag doll. I tried to follow, but it moved so fast. It was carrying Danny, but it was still moving faster than I could run. Frank and I spent hours searching for Danny. We found his torn jacket hanging from a tree branch 15 feet up. There were drops of blood leading toward a steep cliff face, but the trail went cold at the rock wall. No animal climbs straight up a cliff while carrying a 150-pound teenager, Frank said, grimly. That made 5 victims. Only 2 more to go. Frank set up his tent near my cabin that night. We took turns staying awake, watching the forest. Around midnight, it was Frank's turn to sleep and my turn to watch. I was sitting on my porch with a rifle across my lap when I heard it. Maggie, Maggie. The voice was coming from the woods, soft and sad. It sounded exactly like my brother Tommy, but Tommy had been dead for 20 years. Maggie, why didn't you save me? I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. The voice was definitely Tommy's, but that was impossible. I'm waiting for you, Maggie. In the deep woods where the White One lives. Come find me. I wanted to wake Frank, but something stopped me. The voice was getting fainter, moving deeper into the forest. If I woke Frank, whatever was out there might disappear. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the voice. The trees seemed to close in around me as I walked deeper into the woods. My flashlight beam kept catching glimpses of white movement just at the edge of the light, but whenever I pointed it directly at something, there was nothing there. This way, Maggie, just a little further. Tommy's voice led me to a clearing I'd never seen before.
even though I thought I knew every inch of these mountains. In the center of the clearing was a cave opening, dark as midnight. The white stones around the entrance were arranged in that same ceremonial pattern I'd been seeing at the attack sites. "Come inside, Maggie. I've been waiting so long." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I had to know. I had to understand what had killed my brother all those years ago. I stepped into the cave. The smell hit me first. Death and decay, old and fresh, mixed together. My flashlight beam revealed paintings on the cave walls, crude but clear. They showed a white creature hunting humans, over and over, year after year. Some of the paintings looked ancient, but others looked fresh, and scattered on the cave floor were bones. Human bones, some old and yellow, others still pink with dried meat. I saw Danny's torn shirt among the remains. That's when I heard breathing behind me. Slow, deep, definitely not human. I turned around slowly, knowing what I would see. The white shadow filled the cave entrance, blocking my escape. It was massive, at least 10 feet tall, covered in thick white fur. But its face was the worst part. It was almost human, with blue eyes that looked right into mine with intelligence and hunger. "Hello, Maggie," it said in Tommy's voice. "I've been waiting for you." I tried to raise my rifle, but the creature moved faster than anything that big should be able to move. It knocked the gun from my hands and grabbed me by the shoulders. Its claws dug into my skin, but not deep enough to kill. Not yet. "You taste like your brother did," it whispered. "Sweet and innocent. He cried for you at the end, you know. Called your name." I was too terrified to speak, but the creature seemed to want to talk. "Do you know what I am, Maggie? I am Envy Uktena, cursed to hunt forever. Every 7 years I must feed, or I die. But this time is different. This time, I'm tired." It released me and stepped back. "I have walked these mountains for 200 years. I have taken hundreds of lives. But the curse is killing me slowly, eating me from inside. I need someone to take my place." The creature's blue eyes never left mine. "You understand predators, Maggie. You study them, you track them, you know how they think. You would make a good white shadow." I found my voice. "You're insane." It laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a cliff. "Am I? Look around you. I am real. The curse is real, and you are the 7th victim, just as the curse demands. But I offer you a choice, the wit." His shadow moved closer. "You can die like the others, or you can take the curse from me and become what I am. Live forever, hunt forever, feed forever." I looked around the cave, at the bones, and the paintings and the death that surrounded this creature. "What happens if I refuse?" "Then you die, and I continue for another 7 years, and 7 years after that, and 7 years after that, until someone finally accepts what I offer." The creature smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "But Maggie, you were meant for this. You've been hunting all your life, trying to understand predators. Now you can become the ultimate predator." I thought about my brother Tommy, about all the people this thing had killed. I thought about Frank sleeping in his tent nearby, not knowing what was happening. I thought about all the innocent people who would die if this creature lived another 7 years. "There's a third option," I said quietly. The white shadow tilted its head. "What option?" I smiled and pulled the iron climbing spike from my belt. "I kill you." The iron spike bit deep into the creature's chest, and it screamed like nothing I'd ever heard. The sound was part human, part animal, part something else entirely. The white shadow staggered backward, black blood pouring from the wound. "Iron," it gasped. "You know about iron." Joseph Stands Tall had told me the old stories, including the one about how Cherokee shamans used iron weapons to fight evil spirits. I'd been carrying the climbing spike ever since our conversation, just in case, but the creature wasn't dead.
It pulled the spike from its chest and threw it aside, and I watched in horror as the wound began to close. "You cannot kill what is already dead," it said, advancing on me again. "The curse keeps me alive." I backed deeper into the cave, looking for another weapon or a way out. That's when I saw the altar. It was carved from stone and covered with symbols that looked like the Cherokee writing I'd seen in museums. On top of the altar was a small bundle wrapped in rotting leather. My hands were shaken as I unwrapped it. Inside was a child's toy, a small wooden horse that had been carved by hand. It was the kind of toy Cherokee children might have played with 200 years ago. But it was also exactly like the toy horses my father used to carve for me and Tommy when we were kids. "That belonged to my son," the White Shadow said quietly. "Before the curse took me, before I became this thing, I had a family." For the first time, the creature's voice sounded human, sad and tired and full of pain. His name was Little Wolf. He was 7 years old when the curse transformed me. I killed him first. The creature's blue eyes filled with tears. "The curse made me kill my own child." I looked at the wooden horse in my hands and understood. The White Shadow wasn't just a monster. It had been a man once, a father who loved his son. The curse had turned him into something horrible, but somewhere deep inside, the man still existed. "You don't have to keep doing this," I said softly. "The curse can be broken." The creature laughed bitterly. "How? I have tried everything. I have begged the spirits, I have starved myself, I have thrown myself from cliffs. Nothing works. The curse always brings me back." I thought about what Joseph had told me about Cherokee traditions, about purification rituals, and the power of forgiveness. What if the curse can only be broken by someone who understands your pain? The White Shadow stopped advancing. "What do you mean?" "I lost my brother when I was 9 years old. For 20 years I've been trying to understand why he died, trying to make sense of predators and death and loss. Maybe that's why I'm here. Maybe I'm not supposed to become the White Shadow. Maybe I'm supposed to help you find peace." I held up the wooden horse. "This is all you have left of who you used to be. Your son, Little Wolf. The man you were before the curse." The curse. Eacher's face changed. For a moment it looked almost human. "I loved him so much I would have done anything to protect him." "Then let me help you protect him now," I said. "Let his memory be what breaks the curse." I began to recite the Cherokee purification prayer that Joseph had taught me, holding the wooden horse above my head. The words were in Cherokee, but somehow I understood their meaning. They were about forgiveness, about letting go of anger and pain, about finding peace. The White Shadow began to change as I spoke. Its white fur started to fall away, revealing human skin underneath. It got smaller, less monstrous. The blue eyes became warm instead of cold. "I can see him," the creature whispered. "I can see Little Wolf. He's not afraid of me anymore." The transformation continued. Soon, instead of a monster, there was a man kneeling in the cave. He was tall and strong, with long black hair and the weathered face of someone who had lived in the mountains. He looked like the Cherokee warriors in old photographs. "Thank you," he said in his own voice, not Tommy's. "Thank you for giving me back my son." The man who had been the White Shadow smiled peacefully and closed his eyes. His body began to fade, becoming transparent like morning mist. Within moments he was gone. All that remained was the wooden horse and a sense of peace that filled the cave like warm sunlight. I heard Frank calling my name from outside. He'd woken up and found me missing. I walked out of the cave carrying the toy horse, and the cave entrance crumbled behind me, sealing itself forever. "Maggie, are you okay?" I heard screaming. I looked back at where the cave had been. There was nothing there now but solid rock and growing vines. "I'm fine, Frank. It's over." 6 months later, I quit the Park Service. I couldn't explain what had happened that night in a way that anyone would believe, and I couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal. I became a freelance cryptozoologist, investigating reports of unknown creatures all over the country.
Most of them turn out to be hoaxes or misidentifications. But sometimes, just sometimes, I find evidence of something real, something that shouldn't exist but does. I keep the wooden horse on my desk wherever I go. It reminds me that monsters aren't always what they seem. Sometimes they're just people who got lost in their own pain and needed someone to help them find their way home. The attacks at Mount Mitchell stopped that night. No more mysterious disappearances, no more stone circles, no more white shadows in the forest. The Cherokee elders say the curse is broken forever. But sometimes, when I'm walking alone in the woods, I still hear voices calling my name. Not Tommy's voice anymore. That stopped after I helped Envy Uktena find peace. Now it's different voices. Other lost souls who need help. Last month I got a call about something in the Louisiana bayous. Local people are talking about a creature that looks like a giant wolf but walks upright. It's been taking livestock and leaving strange symbols carved in trees. I'm driving down there next week. Frank thinks I'm crazy for chasing monsters instead of having a normal life. Maybe he's right. But I learned something in that cave that I can't ignore. Sometimes the monsters are the ones who need saving. Sometimes, if you listen carefully to the darkness, you can hear more than just fear and death. You can hear pain and loneliness and the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, understands what it's like to be lost. I keep one white hair from the white shadow pressed between the pages of my old field notebook. Not as proof. I learned that some truths can't be proven, only experienced. I keep it as a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, there's always a chance for redemption. Even monsters were human once. And if you're very brave and very lucky, and you listen with your heart instead of your fear, sometimes you can help them, Rama. Ember, how to be human again. The mountains are quiet now. The white shadow sleeps in peace with his son. But somewhere out there, in other dark woods and forgotten places, other voices are calling. And I'm listening. My name is William Ravenshade, but everyone calls me Bill. I've been a forest ranger for 8 years now, patrolling the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. People think it's a peaceful job, walking through pretty trees all day. They don't know about the long nights alone, the broken radios, or the things you sometimes see moving in the corner of your eye. I came to this job after Korea. The war messed me up pretty bad, and I needed somewhere quiet to put my head back together. My wife couldn't handle the nightmares, the way I'd wake up screaming about dead soldiers. She left 3 years ago. Can't say I blame her. The forest doesn't judge you for your scars. It just sits there, old and patient, letting you walk its trails until your mind settles down. I know every path in the Bald Mountains area, every stream and ridge. I've mapped boundaries, found lost hikers, and chased off poachers. In 8 years, I've never left a job unfinished. That's why when the survey team came to me scared out of their minds, I had to take it seriously. "Something's following us out there, Ranger," said Tom Martinez, the crew chief. His hands shook as he lit his cigarette. Dark shapes, like people made of shadow, always at the edge of what you can see. I'd heard stories like this before. Men who'd been through combat sometimes saw things that weren't there. Your brain plays tricks when it's trying to heal itself. "Could be poachers," I told him. "Or maybe someone's playing pranks. I'll check it out." But Tom grabbed my arm. "This ain't no prank, Bill. My compass started spinning like crazy out there. And look at this." He showed me a photograph from their survey work. It should have shown trees and rocks. Instead, there were dark human shapes standing between the pines. Shadows that looked too solid, too real. "Probably just a double exposure," I said. But something cold moved in my stomach. The next morning, I packed my gear and headed out to their survey area. Military training never leaves you, so I carried my old .45 pistol and kept my eyes moving. The forest felt wrong somehow, too quiet. Birds should have been singing, but the trees stood silent like they were holding their breath. I found their equipment scattered across a small clearing. Surveying tools worth hundreds of dollars just left behind. No signs of a struggle, no footprints except the survey teams. But on the trees around the clearing, I saw something that made my skin crawl. Dark stains shaped like human shadows were burned into the bark. Not painted or carved, but somehow pressed into the wood itself. They looked like people with their arms outstretched, but the shadows fell wrong. Even in full sunlight, they stayed black as midnight. I took pictures and marked the area on my map. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't natural. But I'm a practical man. There had to be an explanation that didn't involve ghosts or spirits. That night in my cabin, I called my supervisor, Carl Morrison. "Probably kids from town," he said. "You know how they get around Halloween. Check it out for a few more days, then we'll call the sheriff if needed." But when I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me through the windows. I went back to the survey area 3 times over the next week. Each time I found more shadow stains on trees, always in places where real shadows couldn't possibly fall. My compass did weird things too, spinning wildly or pointing to empty air instead of magnetic north. The animals had started avoiding the area completely. No bird sounds, no squirrel chatter, nothing. Even the insects seemed to stay away. In 8 years of forest patrol, I'd never seen anything like it. On Thursday morning, I met with Robert Walking Stick, a Cherokee elder who lived near the forest boundary. Robert knew these mountains better than anyone, and he'd always been straight with me about local problems. "Shadow walkers," he said quietly when I described what I'd found. "My grandfather spoke of them, spirits of those who died in war, who can't find peace." Come on, Robert, you know I don't believe in that stuff. But Robert's dark eyes were serious. "This land has seen much death, Bill. Cherokee warriors, settlers, soldiers. Some wounds never heal, just get covered over like old scars." He told me the survey area sat on top of ancient burial mounds, hidden by decades of forest growth. The early settlers had disturbed the graves, never bothering to bless the ground or ask forgiveness. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are they showing up after all these years?" Robert studied my face. "Maybe they smell war on you. Maybe they recognize a fellow soldier." I left his house feeling unsettled. My war memories had been getting worse lately, nightmares coming back stronger than they had in years. But that was just stress from this strange case. It had nothing to do with Indian spirits. That afternoon, I decided to stake out the survey area from a hidden position. If someone was playing pranks, I'd catch them in the act. I set up in a thick stand of pines about 50 yards from the clearing with a clear view of the shadow-stained trees. The sun was getting low, painting the forest in orange and red. Everything looked normal. Then I saw him. A man-shaped shadow moved between the trees, but there was no person casting it. The shadow walked upright like a soldier on patrol, arms swinging naturally. But when I looked for the body that should be making the shadow, I saw nothing but empty air. My hands started shaking. This wasn't PTSD. This was real. The shadow stopped and turned toward my hiding place. Even though it had no face, I felt it looking directly at me. Then it raised one arm in what looked like a military salute. I blinked hard, sure I was losing my mind. When I opened my eyes, the shadow was gone, but more were coming. Dark human shapes moved through the trees, dozens of them, all walking with the same steady military pace. They gathered in the clearing where the survey equipment had been scattered, forming up in neat rows like soldiers at attention. I tried to take pictures, but my camera wouldn't work. The film came out black, like it had been exposed to intense light. My radio crackled with static and whispers in languages I didn't recognize. As full darkness fell, the shadows grew more solid. I could see details now. The outline of uniforms, weapons, faces that were holes in the darkness. Some wore Civil War blue and gray. Others had the gear of World War soldiers, Korean War veterans like myself. One shadow broke away from the group and walked straight toward my hiding place. This time I could make out details. Sergeant's stripes, combat boots, the outline of an M1 rifle. As it got closer, I recognized the face. It was Jimmy Martinez, my squad mate who'd died in Korea. Half his head was blown away, just like the day the Chinese mortars got him. "Billy," the shadow whispered,
and his voice was like wind through dead leaves. "Why didn't you come with us? We've been waiting so long." I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran through those dark woods like a scared kid, crashing through bushes and stumbling over roots. Behind me, I heard dozens of voices calling my name, asking why I'd left them behind. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. The next morning, I called in sick and drove to the nearest town. I needed to think, needed to get away from the forest and clear my head. But even 50 miles away, I kept seeing dark shapes in my peripheral vision. I tried calling Carl Morrison, but he didn't answer his radio. That was strange. Carl always answered, day or night. It was his rule. When I got back to the ranger station that evening, there was a message from the Survey C, Ompany. Their crew chief, Tom Martinez, had been found in his hotel room sitting in a chair by the window. He was alive, but his hair had turned completely white overnight. He kept mumbling about shadow soldiers and wouldn't speak to anyone else. The doctors said it was some kind of shock, but they couldn't explain the hair color change. A healthy man in his 30s doesn't go white overnight from stress. I knew I had to go back to the burial ground. Whatever these shadow walkers wanted, they weren't going to stop until they got it. And now they were hurting innocent people. I loaded my gear that night. Flashlights with extra batteries, my .45 pistol, though I doubted bullets would work, a first aid kit, and some emergency flares. I also brought something Robert Walking Stick had given me, a small leather pouch filled with tobacco and sage, blessed according to Cherokee tradition. "If you must go there," he'd said, "carry this. Show respect to the spirits. They may remember honor, even in their pain." The forest felt different as I hiked in by moonlight. The air was thick, like before a thunderstorm, and every step seemed to echo louder than it should. My flashlight beam kept flickering, even with fresh batteries. I found Carl Morrison's truck parked at the edge of the survey area. The driver's door was open, keys still in the ignition. Carl's radio lay on the ground, smashed to pieces. Following his footprints, I made my way toward the burial mounds Robert had told me about. The shadow stains on the trees were deeper now, more detailed. I could make out individual faces, hands reaching out from the bark as if trying to break free. I found Carl in a small clearing surrounded by ancient earthen mounds covered in pine needles and fallen leaves. He was sitting with his back against a large oak tree, staring straight ahead with empty eyes. He was alive, but barely. His hair was white like Tom's, and he looked like he'd aged 20 years in 3 days. When I touched his shoulder, he turned to me with a confused expression. "Bill, is that you? Where are we?" "Well, we're in the forest, Carl. What happened?" "The soldiers," he whispered. "So many soldiers. They showed me the war, all the wars. The Cherokee, the Civil War, World War I, Korea. They're all still fighting, Bill. They can't stop." Around us, the shadows began to move. They rose from the burial mounds like smoke, taking human shape as they stood. Cherokee warriors with ancient weapons, Confederate and Union soldiers, doughboys from France, Marines from the Pacific, GIs from Korea. And in the center of them all stood Jimmy Martinez, still missing half his head from that mortar round. "You left us behind, Billy," he said, his voice hollow and sad. "You came home, but we're still over there, still fighting. It's not fair. Jimmy, you're dead. You died in Korea. I couldn't save you." "Dead?" Jimmy laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "Look around, Billy, we're all dead. But we can't rest. Too much pain, too much anger. The only peace we can find is sharing it with others." The shadow soldiers began to move closer, forming a circle around Carl and me. I could see their wounds now. Bullet holes, missing limbs, burned faces. All the ways men die in war. "Join us," Jimmy said. "You belong with us anyway. You should have died in Korea too. You know that, don't you? You should have died with your squad." Part of me wanted to. The guilt I'd carried for 15 years, the nightmares, the way my wife looked at me like I was broken. Maybe it would be easier to just give up and join the Eternal Patrol. But I looked at Carl, barely alive and completely terrified, and I knew I couldn't abandon him the way I thought I'd abandoned my squad. "No," I said, standing up and pulling Carl to his feet.
I'm not done yet. The shadows screamed with rage and rushed toward us. The shadow walkers moved like a tide of darkness, reaching out with hands that felt like ice water, and they touched me. I saw flashes of their deaths. Cherokee warriors falling to cavalry sabers, Civil War soldiers bleeding out in muddy fields, my own squad dying in Korean snow. Carl collapsed, unable to handle the psychic assault. I dragged him behind the largest burial mound, but I knew it wouldn't protect us for long. The shadows could move through solid matter like it wasn't there. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted into the darkness. A new voice answered, deeper and older than the others. A Cherokee warrior stepped forward, wearing traditional war paint and carrying a tomahawk. Half his chest was blown away by an old musket ball. "I am Chief Blackwater," he said. "I died fighting the soldiers who came to take our land. For 200 years I have watched more warriors join our ranks. All who die in war, all who know the taste of blood and gunpowder. But why hurt innocent people?" "Because the pain must be shared," Blackwater said. "Because the living forget too quickly, move on too easily. You send your young men to die, then pretend it never happened. We will not be forgotten." Around us, the shadow army grew larger. I saw faces from every American war, Cherokee and white, Union and Confederate, all united in death and endless pain. "You can end this," Jimmy Martinez said, kneeling beside me. "Join us willingly, and we'll let the others go. You're one of us anyway, Billy. You know you are." He was right. I'd never really left Korea. Part of me had died in that frozen foxhole with my squad. I'd been living like a ghost for 15 years, haunted by survivor's guilt and the faces of dead friends. But then I remembered what Robert Walkingstick had taught me. These weren't evil spirits. They were souls in pain, warriors who couldn't find peace because their deaths had been dishonored, their sacrifice forgotten. I pulled out the leather pouch Robert had given me and scattered the blessed tobacco and sage in a circle around Carl and myself. "I honor your sacrifice," I said, speaking to Chief Blackwater and all the shadow warriors. "You died, protecting what you loved. Your pain is real, and you deserve to be remembered." The shadows stopped moving, listening. "But this isn't the way. Hurting innocent people won't heal your wounds or bring honor to your deaths. Let me help you find peace instead." Chief Blackwater studied me with eyes like dark stars. "You offer yourself in their place?" "If that's what it takes." The Cherokee chief nodded slowly. "You understand the warrior's burden. Very well. We will accept your sacrifice, but not your death. Instead, you will carry our memory. You will ensure we are not forgotten." The shadow warriors began to fade as the first light of dawn touched the trees. But before they disappeared completely, Jimmy Martinez touched my forehead with his ghostly hand. "Thank you, Billy, for remembering us, for not leaving us behind again." The vision that flooded my mind was overwhelming. Every battle, every death, every moment of courage and terror these warriors had experienced. But instead of crushing me, it felt like a weight I'd been meant to carry all along. When the sun rose fully, the shadows were gone. Carl was breathing normally, his color returning to normal. The shadow stains on the trees had faded to barely visible marks, but I could still feel them, the shadow warriors, not as tormentors, but as comrades. They would always be with me now, and I would make sure their stories were told. Carl recovered completely, though he requested a transfer to a different district. He never talked about what happened in the burial ground, and I didn't push him. Some experiences are too big for words. I stayed in the Cherokee National Forest for 2 more years, making sure the ancient burial mounds were properly marked and protected. I worked with Robert Walkingstick and other Cherokee elders to hold proper blessing ceremonies for the disturbed graves. The survey company finished their work without any more incidents. Tom Martinez's hair stayed white, but he said his nightmares about the war had stopped completely. He told me he felt lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying something heavy and finally put it down. My own nightmares changed too. Instead of reliving my squad's death over and over, I dreamed of them at peace, sitting around a campfire and telling stories. They'd wave at me sometimes, but they didn't ask me to join them anymore. They knew I had work to do among the living. I eventually transferred to a ranger station in the Smoky Mountains, where I started a program helping other veterans deal with combat trauma. Something about my story, carefully edited, seemed to help them understand that guilt and grief were weights that could be shared, not carried alone. On quiet evenings, I sometimes see friendly shadows moving between the trees, not threatening or angry, just there, keeping me company, reminding me that no warrior fights alone, even after death. I still carry Robert Walking Stick's medicine pouch, and I visit the Cherokee burial ground twice a year to leave tobacco and sage. The shadow stains on the trees are barely visible now, but if you know where to look, you can still see them. Local hikers sometimes report seeing figures in military uniforms walking the old trails, but they describe them as peaceful, even protective. Some say these guardian spirits have helped lost hikers find their way home or warned them away from dangerous areas. I know the truth. The shadow walkers are still there, but they're not hunting anymore. They're standing watch, doing what good soldiers do, protecting the living while honoring the dead. My name is William Ravenshade, and I carry the memories of warriors from many wars. It's not an easy burden, but it's an honored one. And someday, when my own patrol finally ends, I know I won't be walking alone into whatever comes next. The shadows between the trees will be waiting for me, not as enemies, but as brothers in arms. Until then, I keep their stories alive, because that's what we owe the dead, to remember their sacrifice and learn from their pain. That's how the haunting ended, and the healing began. My name is Danny Harrington, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. Growing up in coal country, you hear stories. Most are just stories, but some stay with you in ways that make you check your locks twice at night. I work the Copper Mountain District in George Washington National Forest, Virginia. It's rough country, all strip-mined scars and flooded quarries where they tore the coal out of the earth decades ago. My daddy worked those mines before they closed down. So did his daddy. When the company pulled out in the 70s, they left behind a maze of tunnels and processing ruins that stretch for miles underground. People around here still tell stories about the coal devil. They say back in 1947, a miner named Thomas Briggs sold his soul to keep working when the company threatened to shut down his section. The deal went bad, like they always do. Cave-in trapped him with whatever he'd been talking to down there. They sealed that tunnel with concrete and never spoke of it again. I never believed any of that nonsense. 13 years tracking everything from black bears to mountain lions teaches you that real animals are dangerous enough without making up monsters. My job is wildlife management and large predator tracking. I spent 2 tours in Vietnam as military police before coming home to these mountains. I know the difference between fairy tales and real threats. But in November of 1987, something started killing livestock around Copper Mountain. Not just killing, butchering them in ways that made no sense. Cattle drained of blood but left otherwise untouched. Sheep arranged in perfect circles around old mine equipment. Wounds too clean for any animal I knew. The first call came from Earl Patterson's farm on a Tuesday morning. Earl's family had been raising cattle in these mountains for 4 generations. He knew every predator that walked these hills. "Danny, you need to see this," he said over the radio. His voice shook. "Something got into my herd last night, but this ain't like nothing I ever seen." I drove out to Earl's place in my Park Service truck, expecting to find coyote kills or maybe signs of a rogue bear. The November air was sharp and cold, full of the smell of coming snow. Mountains in late fall have their own quiet, like the whole world is holding its breath. What I found in Earl's pasture made me stop dead in my tracks. 3 cattle lay in a perfect triangle about 50 yards from the old mining road. No blood on the ground, no drag marks, no signs of struggle. But each animal had been opened with surgical precision, completely drained, then closed back up so neat you could barely see the cuts. "Been ranching 40 years, Earl said, standing beside me. "Never seen anything like it. Look at their eyes." The cattle's eyes were wide open, staring at something none of us could see. But what really got to me was the silence. No flies, no buzzards. Nothing would touch those carcasses. "Could be a cult," I told Earl, though the words felt wrong leaving my mouth. "Some kind of ritual killing. I'll file a report with the sheriff." Earl nodded, but I could see he didn't believe it any more than I did. That night, alone in my cabin, I spread topographic maps across my kitchen table. The Patterson farm sat right next to the old Briggs mining operation. Coincidence, maybe. But 13 years in these woods had taught me to pay attention to patterns. Outside my window, the first snow of winter began to fall. The next morning brought 3 more calls. Same story. Cattle killed clean, arranged in impossible ways, untouched by scavengers. All within a mile of old mining sites. I loaded my truck with tracking equipment and headed up to investigate the kills myself. The snow had gotten heavy overnight, big wet flakes that stuck to everything and muffled sound. Perfect tracking weather, except there were no tracks to follow. At the Henderson place, I found 2 steers positioned on either side of an old mine cart that hadn't moved in 40 years. The cart's wheels were still turning. I checked the mechanism 3 times. No power source, no wind strong enough to move solid iron. But those wheels kept turning with a steady creak, creak, creak that set my teeth on edge. My radio crackled. "Danny, you copy?" It was Sheriff Bob Patterson, Earl's younger brother. "I'm here, Bob. Got another situation. Miller's farm, up near the old processing plant. Can you meet me there?" "On my way." The Miller place sat in a valley between 2 ridges, right where the company used to run their main operation. Concrete foundations and rusted machinery dotted the landscape like broken teeth. The processing plant itself was a hollow shell, windows dark as empty eye sockets. Bob's cruiser was already there when I arrived. I found him standing next to the barn, staring at something in the snow. "Look at this," he said. Footprints led from the tree line to the barn. Human footprints, but wrong somehow. Too deep for the soft snow, too wide. And the spacing suggested someone at least 7 feet tall, taking impossibly long strides. "Could be snowshoes," I said. But even as I said it, I knew better. The prints were too clear, too detailed. I could make out individual toe marks. We followed the trail to the barn. Inside, we found Miller's prize bull hanging from the rafters. Not with rope or chain, the animal was somehow stuck to the wooden beam like it had been pressed there and frozen in place. "Jesus Christ," Bob whispered. I climbed up to examine the attachment point. No hardware, no adhesive. The bull's back was simply fused with the wood grain, as if both materials had melted together and cooled. That's when we heard the sound. Deep underground, maybe a quarter mile away, came the unmistakable ring of metal on stone. Pick and shovel work, steady, methodical, like someone mining coal in the dark. Kay, Bob, and I looked at each other. Nobody had worked these mines in over a decade. "Could be kids exploring," Bob said, but his voice lacked conviction. "In a snowstorm? At 10 in the morning?" The sound stopped as suddenly as it started. In the silence that followed, I became aware of something else. My compass needle was spinning. Not drifting, spinning like a coin on a table. I walked outside the barn. The needle settled, pointing north like it should. Back inside, it started spinning again. "Bob, we need to get down into those tunnels." He shook his head. "Company sealed them all back in '76. Concrete plugs thick as your truck. Nobody's getting in or out." But the footprints in the snow told a different story. They led from the barn straight to a cluster of mine buildings half buried in snow and overgrowth. I followed them to what looked like a solid concrete wall. The footprints went right through it. I pressed my hand against the concrete, cold and solid as granite. But I could swear I felt vibration, like heavy machinery running somewhere far below. "Danny," Bob's voice was tight. "We got company." I turned around. Standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 100 yards away, was a figure in dark clothing, tall and perfectly still, watching us through the falling snow. "Hey," I called out. "Park Service. Need to talk to you." The figure didn't move. Didn't acknowledge us at all. Just stood there like a statue, and somehow that was worse than if it had run. I started walking toward it, hand on my radio. "This is Ranger Harrington. I need backup at the Miller property. Coordinates." My radio screamed, not static, not interference. A human scream, high and desperate and full of terror. It went on for 10 seconds, then cut to silence. When I looked up, the figure was gone. Bob and I searched the tree line for 20 minutes. No tracks, no sign anyone had been here at all. But in the snow where the figure had stood, we found something that made my blood run cold. A mining helmet from the 1940s, brass carbide lamp still burning with a steady blue flame. Word spread fast in a small mountain community. By evening, half the county knew something was killing livestock around Copper Mountain. The other half knew something impossible was happening near the old mines. I spent that night in my cabin, trying to write a coherent report for my supervisor. How do you explain cattle fused to barn rafters? How do you document footprints that pass through solid concrete? Around midnight, my phone rang. "Danny?" It was Sarah Patterson, Bob's 18-year-old daughter. Her voice was shaking. "Is my dad with you?" "No, honey, haven't seen him since this afternoon." "Why?" "He left around 8 to check on something at the mines. Said he'd be back in an hour. That was 4 hours ago. His radio's not working." I was already reaching for my coat. "Stay by the phone. I'll find him." The snow had turned to freezing rain, coating everything in a layer of ice that made walking treacherous. I took my truck as far as the mining road would allow, then continued on foot with a flashlight and emergency radio. The Miller property looked different at night. Shadows seemed deeper, and the sound of my footsteps echoed strangely, like I was walking through a vast empty space instead of open ground. I found Bob's cruiser parked next to the old processing plant, engine still warm, driver's door hanging open. His flashlight lay in the snow, lens cracked but still working. "Bob!" I called. "Bob Patterson!" My voice bounced off the concrete ruins and came back wrong, like it had been filtered through something that changed its meaning. I followed his footprints to the same concrete wall where we'd lost the trail earlier. His tracks stopped there, but this time I could see scratches in the concrete. Claw marks, like something with metal talons had been digging. That's when I heard Bob's voice. "Danny! Danny, help me!" It was coming from underground. Me, offled by tons of rock and concrete. Impossible, but undeniable. "Bob, where are you?" "I'm trapped. Something's down here with me. It's..." His voice cut off in a scream that made my flashlight beam shake in my hand. I ran back to my truck and grabbed the emergency radio. "This is Ranger Harrington. I need rescue teams at the old Briggs mining operation. Officer Patterson is trapped underground. Repeat, officer down, trapped in sealed mine system." The radio crackled back. "Danny, this is dispatch. According to our records, all mine entrances were permanently sealed in 1976. Are you sure about your location?" "Positive. I can hear him calling for help. We'll send units, but it's going to take time in this weather. At least 2 hours." 2 hours. In below freezing temperatures, trapped underground with something that could claw through concrete. I circled the processing plant, looking for any opening large enough for a man. Nothing. Every door and window had been bricked up or welded shut years ago. But Bob's voice kept calling from somewhere beneath my feet. Then I remembered something from my childhood. My father telling stories about the mine layouts, how the tunnels connected in ways the company maps never showed. Miners would sometimes cut their own passages between sections, creating a hidden network that only they knew about. I started checking the smaller outbuildings. The third one, an old equipment shed, had a floor that rang hollow when I stepped on it. I cleared away years of debris and found a wooden trapdoor hidden under a layer of tar paper. The trapdoor opened onto a ladder leading down into absolute darkness. Bob's voice drifted up from below. "Danny? Is that you? Please, God, get me out of here." I grabbed my emergency kit and started down the ladder. 20 feet, 30, 40 feet down into the earth, the walls changed from concrete to raw stone, carved by hand tools decades ago. At the bottom, I found myself in a tunnel barely wide enough for one man. Support timbers from the 1940s still held up the ceiling, though many were cracked
and sagging. My flashlight beam revealed metal rails running along the floor, a cart track leading deeper into the mountain. "Bob, keep talking. I'm following your voice. Hurry. It knows you're here. It can smell you." I followed the tunnel for what felt like a mile, though distance was hard to judge in the narrow space. The air got thicker the deeper I went, full of coal dust and something else, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. The tunnel opened into a large chamber carved out of the mountain's heart. Old mining equipment filled the space. Coal carts, pickaxes, machinery I couldn't identify, and hanging from the ceiling on chains that shouldn't have been able to support their weight, 3 mining helmets with burning carbide lamps cast dancing shadows on the walls. In the center of the chamber, Bob Patterson sat against a pile of coal, his leg twisted at an impossible angle. "Thank God," he whispered when he saw me. I fell through a rotten floorboard up in the shed, landed wrong, been down here for hours, listening to... He stopped, looking around nervously. Listening to things moving in the dark. I helped him to his feet, supporting his weight. "We need to get you out of here. Can you walk at all?" "I'll try." "But Danny, there's something else down here. Something big. I've been hearing it digging, getting closer." As if summoned by his words, a sound echoed through the chamber. Metal striking stone, but not the random strikes of falling rocks. This was rhythmic, purposeful, like someone mining coal with impossible strength and speed. The sound was getting louder. "Move," I said. We started toward the tunnel, Bob leaning heavily on my shoulder. Behind us, the mining sounds grew closer, and with them came something else. Breathing. Deep and ragged, like lungs full of coal dust trying to draw clean air. Halfway to the tunnel entrance, my light started to dim. I shook it, cursed, and kept moving. The breathing was right behind us now, close enough that I could feel hot air on the back of my neck. I didn't look back, couldn't look back, because some part of my mind that still remembered basic survival instincts was screaming that if I saw what was following us, I'd never make it out of that mountain alive. We reached the ladder as my flashlight died completely. In the absolute darkness, I guided Bob's hands to the rungs and pushed him up ahead of me. Below us, something large scraped against stone, and I heard a voice that might have once been human. "Don't leave," it whispered. "Stay and dig with me. Forever and ever, we'll dig." I climbed faster than I'd ever climbed anything in my life. We made it to the surface just as the rescue teams arrived. Bob went to the hospital with a broken leg and a story nobody would believe. I went home to a bottle of whiskey and 3 hours of staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the voice in the dark. But the next morning brought proof I couldn't ignore. Sarah Patterson called before sunrise. "Danny, something happened to our livestock. All of them." I drove to the Patterson farm expecting the worst, but what I found was beyond any nightmare I could have imagined. Every animal on the property, cattle, horses, chickens, even their old hound dog, had been arranged in a perfect spiral pattern around their barn. Not killed, arranged, while still alive. They stood motionless as statues, eyes wide and staring, breathing but unable to move. When I approached the nearest cow, it followed me with its eyes but couldn't turn its head. Couldn't even blink. "How long have they been like this?" I asked Sarah. "Found them this way at dawn." "Danny, what's happening here?" Before I could answer, every animal in the spiral turned its head toward the mountains. All, at once, like they were controlled by the same signal. They stared at Copper Mountain for exactly 30 seconds, then turned back to their original positions. That's when I knew we were dealing with something far worse than a wild animal or disturbed person, something that could control living creatures like puppets on strings. I called my supervisor and requested immediate backup from the Federal Wildlife Response Team. Then I called Bob at the hospital. "Bob, I need you to tell me everything your grandfather told you about Thomas Briggs." There was a long pause. Why? Because I think he's still down there. Another pause, longer this time. Granddad said Briggs was working Section 7 when the company decided to shut it down. The coal was running out, but Briggs had a family to feed and nowhere else to go. Started acting strange in his final weeks, staying underground for double shifts, talking to himself, writing symbols on the tunnel walls with his fingernails. What kind of symbols? Mining charts, but wrong somehow. Maps of tunnels that didn't exist leading to chambers full of coal that couldn't be there. Granddad said Briggs claimed he'd found something in the deep places, something that would keep the mine working forever. And the cave-in? November 15th, 1947. Happened during the night shift when only Briggs was working Section 7. Company sealed it with concrete the next day, said it was too dangerous to recover the body, but Granddad always wondered if that was the real reason. November 15th, exactly 40 years ago. I hung up and started gathering gear for a return trip to the mines. If Thomas Briggs had somehow survived down there for 4 decades, feeding on whatever he'd made a deal with, then running away wouldn't solve anything. The killings would continue, spreading beyond livestock to people. But as I was loading my truck, Sarah Patterson screamed. I ran back to the spiral of paralyzed animals just in time to see them all collapse at once, dead without a mark on them, still arranged in that perfect pattern. And Standy. Eyeing at the center of the spiral, where nothing had been moments before, was a figure in mining clothes from the 1940s. Thomas Briggs, 8 feet tall and thin as a rail, his skin black as coal dust and cracked like old leather. Red eyes that glowed with their own light. Fingernails grown into claws that could have cut through stone. He stood perfectly still, watching me with those burning eyes, and when he smiled, his teeth were jagged pieces of anthracite coal. "Ranger," he said, and his voice was the sound of picks striking stone. "Come back down. We have work to finish." I reached for my radio, but Briggs moved faster than anything human should be able to move. One moment he was 50 yards away. The next his clawed hand was wrapped around my throat, lifting me off the ground like I weighed nothing. 40 years I've been digging, he whispered, his breath hot and full of coal dust. 40 years, alone in the dark, following the seam deeper and deeper. But the coal doesn't last unless I feed it. Blood and fear, Ranger. That's what keeps the mine alive. His grip tightened, and I felt my feet leave the ground. Through the red haze of oxygen starvation, I could see Sarah running toward her house. At least she might survive to tell someone what happened here. But 40 years in Vietnam and 13 years in these mountains had taught me something about surviving impossible situations. Sometimes the only way out is through. I pulled the emergency flare from my belt and triggered it directly into Briggs' face. The creature screamed and dropped me, clawing at his eyes as magnesium-bright light flooded the barnyard. In that brilliant flare, I could see what Thomas Briggs had really become, not just transformed, but partially transparent. I could see the barn through his body, could see the ground through his feet. He wasn't entirely in our world anymore. "Light!" he hissed, stumbling backward. "Cursed light! The dark is mine! The deep places are mine!" I rolled to my feet and ran for my truck, grabbing the emergency demolition charges I kept for removing. Dangerous trees and rock slides. If Briggs was connected to the mine system, maybe collapsing his tunnels would trap him where he belonged. The creature recovered faster than I'd hoped. As I raced toward the old mining site, I could see him in my rearview mirror, running on all fours like an animal, keeping pace with my truck at 40 miles per hour. I reached the processing plant and ran for the equipment shed with the hidden entrance. Briggs was right behind me, his claws scraping sparks from the concrete as he scrambled over the ruins, down the ladder, into the tunnels, with a monster from the 1940s following close enough that I could hear his ragged breathing. But this time I had a plan. In the main chamber, I set my demolition charges on the support pillars that held up the ceiling. 40 years of water damage had weakened them already. The right explosion would bring down thousands of tons of rock, sealing the chamber forever. Briggs emerged from the tunnel as I was setting the final charge.
"You can't stop the dig," he said, stalking toward me across the chamber. "The seam goes deeper than you know, deeper than anyone knows, and when I'm done with you, I'll find others. This whole mountain will be mine." I backed toward the tunnel entrance, detonator in my hand. "Then you'll dig alone." I triggered the charges. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, and the sound of falling rock was like the mountain itself screaming. I ran for the tunnel as the ceiling collapsed behind me, tons of stone crashing down where Thomas Briggs had been standing. I climbed that ladder faster than any man has a right to climb, emerging into clean air and blessed daylight just as the ground shook beneath my feet. Cracks appeared in the concrete foundations around the processing plant. The old mining road buckled and split. Deep underground, something howled with rage and pain, as 40 years of unnatural life was buried under half the mountain. The official report listed the cause as an underground gas explosion triggered by illegal mining activity. The concrete seals had been damaged by decades of freeze-thaw cycles, allowing methane buildup in the old tunnels. A tragic accident, but no criminal activity suspected. The livestock killing stopped immediately. Bob Patterson recovered from his injuries and requested transfer to a different county. Can't say I blame him. Sarah married a boy from Richmond and moved away the following spring. Earl Patterson sold his farm to a development company and moved to Florida. I stayed on as district ranger for another 5 years, but something changed in me after that November. Caves made me nervous. Dark places set my teeth on edge, and sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind was just right, I could swear I heard the sound of picks and shovels echoing up from deep underground. The mining company paid for a comprehensive geological survey of the entire area in 1988. They found the tunnel system was far more extensive than anyone had realized, with natural caves connecting to man-made passages for miles in every direction. Most of it was unstable and dangerous. They recommended against any future development. But surveys can't measure everything. They can't detect the scratches I found on the inside of that concrete seal 3 months after the collapse. Fresh scratches, made from the inside, as if something with very long claws was trying to dig its way out. I retired from the Park Service in 1992 and moved to Tennessee. Got a job teaching wilderness survival at a community college. Nice, safe work that keeps me above ground during daylight hours. But I still follow the news from Virginia, and sometimes I see stories that make my hands shake. Livestock killings with unusual patterns, hikers who disappear, are near abandoned mining sites. Equipment that operates without power in places where no one should be able to go. The Appalachian Mountains are old, older than human civilization, and they hold secrets in their deep places that we're not meant to understand. The Cherokee knew this. They had stories about things that lived underground, things that demanded payment for disturbing their rest. We took the coal and left the mountains scarred and hollow. But maybe we left something else behind too. Something hungry and patient, waiting in the dark for the next person foolish enough to venture into places where light has never reached. I never went back to Copper Mountain, never planned to. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. But late at night, when I'm grading papers by lamplight, I sometimes catch myself listening for the sound of distant digging, and I wonder if Thomas Briggs is still down there, following that seam deeper and deeper, mining something that was never meant to be disturbed. The mountains remember everything, and some things, once awakened, never go back to sleep. If you ever find yourself in those old mining areas of Virginia, do yourself a favor. Stay on the marked trails, keep to the daylight. And if you hear the sound of picks and shovels coming from underground, don't investigate. Just run, and whatever you do, don't look back.